Everyone. I'd like to call to order this session of the Tacoma Park City Council. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Kovar. Here. Councilmember DeBala. Here. Councilmember Costick. Here. Councilmember Siemens. Present. Councilmember Smith. Councilmember Searcy. Here.
Great. There are no changes. Oh, we do have a proclamation, so that is one change to our agenda this evening. I'll get to that in a moment. Next week, February 26th, starting at 6 p.m. before our council meeting, we have a reception for the Little Free Library Public Art Project. So please come here to the atrium at 6 p.m. to see that art project. Then our council meeting will begin at 7:30. We'll begin with an update from our youth council. And then our work sessions will be a library renovation update and a request to close Ann Street on Saturday, May 2nd for the Crossroads Spring Fest. Then on March 4th, our voting session will be tentatively the resolution on the 2020 Climate Emergency Response Framework, a resolution authorizing the closure of Ann Street on Saturday, May 2nd. Our work sessions that evening will be the election code amendments, our Recreation Center Community Engagement Contract, and FY 2020 Budget Amendment number 3. On Wednesday, March 11th, we'll have a presentation from the Council Compensation Task Force, and our voting sessions will be a single reading ordinance awarding a contract for Recreation Center Community Engagement, and first reading ordinance authorizing FY 2020 Budget Amendment number 3, and the presentation of the 2019 Police Department Annual Report. And I forgot to mention, on Wednesday, March 23rd at 6:30, here before the council meeting, we'll have an information session and public Q&A with Montgomery County Ride-On. Just as, so folks remember, we've been doing these meetings. March 11th?
11th.
Yeah, what did I say?
23rd. It's 11th.
That's the 11th, sorry. I don't know where I got the 21st from. So it says 11th right here. As a reminder, we've been doing these pre-meetings before our council meetings. We had the U.S. Postal Service here, Council Member Tom Hucker, Pepco, and now we get to have Ride-On. So if you have any questions for Ride-On or complaints, please come 6:30 on March 11th. All right. Those are our agenda items for upcoming meetings. I will now do the proclamation. We have a mayoral proclamation. This is in memory of city resident Norman Ridgway. Whereas Norman Ridgway was born on April 29th, 1946, and moved to Tacoma Park in the late 1990s, where he resided at 7620 Maple Avenue until his death on January 26, 2020. And whereas Norman Ridgway suffered from serious health issues, which required him to endure numerous coronary surgeries and procedures, including an experimental heart surgery procedure. And whereas Norman Ridgway remained active in his apartment community, assisting his neighbors in many ways, such as clearing the windshields on their vehicles after snowstorms, repairing their vehicles, and assisting with the distribution of MANA food packages. And whereas Norman Ridgway was a devoted community activist, graduating from the city's Community Police Academy, handing out bulletins for community events, as an active member of the Tacoma Park Community Action Group, volunteering long hours during the city's Independence Day celebration, making and handing out popcorn at many community events, registering voters, driving people to the polls, working for a couple of election candidates, and in countless other ways through the years. And whereas Norman Ridgway, during his entire lifetime, never allowed his serious health issues and discomfort they caused him to keep him from having a full life. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed that I, Kate Stewart, Mayor of the City of Tacoma Park, Maryland, on behalf of the residents, staff, and council, hereby express our sincere appreciation of Norman Ridgway for his many selfless contributions to the community. And Councilmember Siemens, would you like to say a few words?
No, I appreciate your passing that proclamation, and Norman was, as you said, very active in the community. He suffered from those things, his health problems, and it sometimes made him a little grumpy, but he always volunteered to do anything he could. I remember one time he had bypass surgery, and the next day he was up and going over to the store, walking across the street to the store to pick up food for someone. So he was a good man. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll have legislative updates. The legislative session is in full swing in Annapolis, and yeah, and we are looking at a lot of different bills all the time. Just as an update on some things that we've put in testimony for, as we've talked about, one of our main priorities this year is the community choice energy bill that Delegate Charkoudian has put in. We've done written testimony for that and have been actively supporting her bill. Tomorrow, our city manager, our economic development manager are taking a number of businesses from the Crossroads area to be at a press conference and a hearing for Delegate Wilkins' bill on the Purple Line and supporting businesses that are being impacted by the construction of the Purple Line. So that'll happen tomorrow. Grace Wiggins in our Housing and Community Development Department is testifying, or did testify yesterday, on eviction data and the importance of our state, Maryland, doing a better job of keeping data on this. And Maryland is actually notorious for having bad data on evictions. So I'm glad Grace was able to do that.
If I might,
yeah.
Apparently there's a lot of pushback on the request for that.
Really? All right, well, we'll keep an eye on that. And then finally, we've also put in written testimony to another of Delegate Wilkins' bills, looking for green credits for multifamily buildings to help them do sustainability and energy efficiency work for get state income credits. So,
HB 790.
Yes.
For people who are taking notes.
all right. So and there's lots, and we'll update folks on more next week.
Can I just mention
Yeah.
one other? So there are I've been asked this a couple times
Okay.
this week about climate-related bills that the city is going to be putting in testimony on, and that other.
Your speaker is not going on. Stop, don't touch it.
Outdoor voice, should I use my outdoor voice?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So 4 bills that the city is putting in testimony on that if residents who are interested in this topic might want to take a note. The one that Mayor Stewart mentioned, HB 730, is community choice energy. She also mentioned the green tax credits for multifamily buildings. That's HB 790. There's 2 more, the housing performance standards, energy standards for multifamily buildings that are owned publicly. That's HB 982, and another one of our delegates is a sponsor of that. And last but not least, HB 1425, which is a omnibus climate solutions bill that addresses a lot of different aspects of greenhouse gas emissions in the state. So those 4 are ones that we are targeting for folks who have asked me, and we can write this down and send it around as well.
So one other item, Councilwoman Costick sent around an email today and requested that we talk quickly about a letter to WMATA. So.
Yes, so we heard last week, and I really appreciate staff took some time to look into what the proposed WMATA, I'm trying to think of what their whole acronym stands for, WMATA budget involves. And it involves a number of different things. It involves some cuts to some of the bus services, as well as some fare changes, and an increase in some of the rail service. So it has kind of some good things and some bad things. And I learned today that County Councilmember Evan Glass spearheaded the writing of a letter to WMATA's board expressing some concerns regarding the redistribution of funds from Metro buses to Metro Rail. And a number of the entire county council signed off on it, and a number of state delegates did as well. And it raises some concerns, particularly related to equity issues, because a lot of the Metro bus services that would be cut would particularly impact people with lower incomes and people of color who don't live close to Metro Rail stations. So I would like to propose to my colleagues that we as a council write and submit a similar letter expressing some concerns regarding these proposed cuts. There are 2 different Metro bus service lines in Tacoma Park itself that would be impacted by this. the C4 and the K6, which run along, one runs along New Hampshire Avenue and the other along University Boulevard. So it would involve, for those two, it doesn't involve actually cutting the entire service, but it does involve cutting service early morning and late evening. So I would like to propose to my colleagues that we write a similar letter based on that letter and send to the WMATA board.
Great. And are you volunteering to write the letter?
I have already started drafting it.
Awesome. All right. Does anyone have any questions for our colleague? Councilwoman Searcy?
I just want to say I fully support sending the letter forward. I think it's important to keep in mind who actually rides early morning and late night buses. People who have jobs that require them to be in very early, and typically those wages are not extremely high paying. So trying to make sure that folks who need access the most to their jobs have the ability to use public transit as a vehicle for getting there, I think is extremely important. And thank you, Councilmember Kosick, for working on this.
Yes, thank you. And especially given that WMATA has been cutting back its late night hours. So, all right, let's do a hand vote. All those in favor of sending a letter on that Councilwoman Kosick will circulate to us, raise your hand. We're all in favor. Thank you very much for bringing that to us. All right, now we will begin public comments. If you have any public comments, please come to the podium, state your name and where you live, and you have 3 minutes. All right, go ahead,
Paul
Paul.
Krastowski, 7708 Tacoma Avenue. I just want to talk a little bit about the stormwater fee system. When I first read this material, I found it very interesting, and I do like the concept that people who generate the most stormwater should pay the highest fees. I think that's really a good progressive concept. But then I looked at where my home was. It was on the map. And I said, gee, there's something screwy here. Virtually all the stormwater on my property is managed. I don't generate stormwater for the city of Tacoma Park. Or if I do, it's a trivial amount. I've spent a lot of money on managing my stormwater. So Councilmember Kovar was kind enough to send me background documents. But those background documents still didn't tell me how this tier, how my home had been assigned to this tier. So I emailed the Director of Public Works, and she provided me with some additional information. But she said the actual assignments of homes to particular tiers was not public information. Fair enough. I suppose there's something confidential there that she cannot release. However, I did learn from this material that the amount of impervious surface was really determined through a mix of LIDAR and GIS. Basically, these methods are not terribly reliable for this kind of determination. I've seen some recent literature where people are using sophisticated statistical techniques like neural networks to get this to happen, but you can't do this using our regular LIDAR and GIS information. That may be one of the reasons why my home looks kind of out of place here. But in talking to my neighbors, a lot of them believe that their homes are out of place also. So what I would like to suggest is that before this process be implemented, that people actually be informed of how their impervious areas were calculated for their own individual homes. As I got into the ordinance a little bit more, though, I realized we may have some other issues here. One is this definition of impervious surface is an old-fashioned definition. It's like a mid-20th century definition. And we probably should go to a definition of impermeability rather than impervious. Impermeability is the current engineering term that's used for this. And then finally, I thought of our poor city manager. She's the only one who has to decide all the appeals for this process. And I can see hundreds of appeals coming up. I was thinking the city might want to look at a different mechanism for this, maybe a board or something, in order not just to bog down the system getting clogged up with appeals. I'm going to submit some written comments too, hopefully to clarify this a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Any other public comments this evening?
Good evening. I'm Lee Howard. I'm an assistant scoutmaster of Troop 33 here in Tacoma Park. The year 2020 has started out with a mix of levity and gravity for us. Our troop has turned 100 years this year. You'll probably be hearing from us possibly for a proclamation later on in the year. Also, I've been nominated for an Azalea Award, so a community or neighborhood volunteer. Category 8, if you haven't voted yet. So, but this isn't about me. So where the gravity comes in is I felt compelled to come and speak to you about how the National Organization of the Boy Scouts of America has announced that they have filed for Chapter 11 financial restructuring. And there has been a number of communications that have gone out to members like myself, but I felt that it was necessary probably to reach out to the broader community and explain a little bit about this. And I've spoken with some of the other leaders, and I have their blessing. So this was a strategic move in order for the organization to take responsibility for and remedy the pain and suffering caused to victims who have been harmed during their time in scouting. The organization's ultimate goal is to better position itself to continue carrying out the mission of scouting, which, and I hope this isn't too ironic, to prepare youth to make ethical and moral choices over their lifetimes. It's heartbreaking that deviant individuals take advantage of youth-serving organizations like the BSA to harm innocent children. But in the wake of the Me Too movement, it is the right thing to do to take responsibility for what has happened, to reach out to the victims and make a good faith effort to help them heal and do everything possible to protect youth going forward. Having been involved in scouting for 7 years as an adult leader, I can assure you that the safety of youth is the highest priority of the organization. Many safeguards have been implemented over the years, including mandatory youth protection training of all leaders, mandatory background checks for adult leaders, mandatory reporting of known or suspected child abuse to law enforcement, a ban of one-on-one interactions with scouts in person, online, over the phone, or via text, and a volunteer screening database to prevent individuals who were removed from scouting from returning. So what does this all mean for scouting in Tacoma Park? Cub Scout Pack 33 and Troop 33 of Tacoma Park Presbyterian Church have been assured by our local council that the national organization, Chapter 11, won't impact us. Local councils are financially independent from the national organization, and the church has supported the PAC for 81 years and the troop for 100 years, and we will stay the course. So in closing, I just want to express that the adult leaders in Troop 33 have taken a very serious commitment and dedication towards the safety of our youth, and we hope that that message resonates with you here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming tonight. Any other public comments? We'll get you the microphone, Mr. Lovelace, in 1 second. You wanna, you can, okay. We're coming. Go ahead, Mr. Lovelace, I think it's on.
Yep, my name is Pat Lovelace, your official peace delegate. And I want to say thank Candace and Bruce Wolf for getting me down to the meeting tonight. Because we've been trying to get down here for ages. It seems like it's very difficult because it's no one seems to want to help out sometimes. But they helped me out tonight. And I'd like to know, when it comes to the budget, is it possible to budget some money to help get people to get me to the meetings and other people in my situation? I hope so. And also, as far as the Boy Scouts are concerned, I was a Boy Scout when I was growing up. We went on camping trips. We had merit badges. And it was a very, very worthwhile organization. I was very upset when I heard that they filed for Section 11 bankruptcy. And I'd like to see what we can do to prevent this from happening again. My best bet is whenever you notice something like that going on, child molestation or beatings or cruelty or whatever, whenever you get something like that that involves the Scouts, we should have it in place a system of reporting it immediately upon sight, because a reputation like that can destroy an organization. And I'd like to see that scourge taken from the planet forever. I don't think we need to have molestation going on, sexual behavior like that. And I'd like to see what we can do to help the Boy Scouts heal. The other scouts ought to get together and see what they can do to help. You know, it's just nothing to joke about. And I think, you know, that I don't want to see anything happen to the Boy Scouts, because I was a scout. And I consider myself once a scout, always a scout. And I hate to see this happen to an organization that I love so much. And I'd like to tell everybody out there that I want to thank people for helping me out. Thank you, Larry Callahan, and other people, Jim. Yep, I had to get my phone replaced, and he came all the way from Deep Creek to get me a phone. Now that's friendship. And I'd like to thank everybody, because things are doing good when you think about it. And I'd like to tell everybody out there, please help out when you can, not only with the Boy Scouts, but with the handicapped and the elderly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lovelace.
Love it, love it, love it.
Good evening. My name is Drew Kojak. I've been a long-time resident of Tacoma Park, and I live on Westmoreland Avenue in Ward 3. I'm here today to talk about the climate change resolution. This is my first time actually testifying in front of the City Council, so thank you for the opportunity. I am here today to strongly support the adoption of aggressive and speedy and effective action on climate change here in Tacoma. According to the IPCC special report in 2018, in order to keep an increase in global temperature below 1.5 degrees C, carbon pollution must be cut by 45% by 2030 and reduced down to 0 in 2050. I was delighted to hear, and many of my friends were delighted to hear, when Tacoma Park was looking to get to carbon neutrality by 2035. And many of the folks here today are also in support of that effort. One of the reasons why I am here is that I did hear that some other residents were opposed to the legislation, were concerned about some of the aspects in it, and I wanted to be here to make sure that I voiced my support for it. I think it's incredibly important. One of the things that I work on professionally is climate change and air pollution from the transportation sector. And I did take a close look at the transportation provisions in the initial draft and in the current draft. And I was pleased to see a variety of improvements were made. And so I would like to praise and applaud the committee for improving those. You do have some written documentation in front of you that I provided earlier. And I do have some additional suggestions for you to consider between now and the final draft. Those include preferential parking for electric vehicles. They include, if there is a fund created, some additional subsidies for low and moderate income citizens in Tacoma for the purchase of new and used electric vehicles, creation of a consumer outreach and awareness campaign. There is a very large lack of information about electric vehicles that could be helped by that type of effort. Increase in public transit to create better alternatives to single occupancy vehicles is another one that I mentioned. And then finally, my organization works around the world with cities and countries to work on these issues, and there's just a tremendous amount going on. There's some examples there in the testimony that I provide, but
Thank
it might be useful to partner with other cities around the world.
Great. Thank you, Mr.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Evening. Like Drew, I'm a longtime resident of Tacoma Park, and I am in support of the 2020 Climate Emergency Response Framework that's under consideration. Australia is burning, Antarctica is melting, and here in Tacoma Park, one of the most progressive cities in the United States, the daffodils are blooming in February. As I said, I'm a longtime resident. I've been on 107 Grant Avenue for the past 20 years, partly because of Tacoma Park's culture of activism and its take no prisoners attitude about important causes, and this is one of them. That should be no different about a statement of principles on an existential threat that we all plainly understand. The Council's resolution would not be law. It's just a resolution. The Green Police are not going to come for your gas stove, and they will not spot check your light bulbs or your recycling bins. I don't believe that they will. The Council's resolution asserts a set of principles that Montgomery County, the state of Maryland, and the United States can follow. We would be among a handful of much larger cities that have taken bold action to reduce the threat to our planet. You are all legislators and know that this language need not pass a budget test or be enforceable in any way. It is a statement of principles that Tacoma Park suggests ways to reduce the strain on our planet. The country needs a nudge. Barring that, a kick in the pants to manage the greatest threat to our planet, our only planet since it was formed. Compromising on our principles, that's for the birds. And we are already down about 3 billion of them since the last census in 1970. What are you compromising for? Thank you.
Could you give your name, sir?
Can you say?
Again? Yeah.
Yeah.
Aaron Cohen, 107 Grant Avenue.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kurt Kershaw. I live at 7100 Central Avenue, Ward 2, long-term resident. I'm here to voice support for the climate change resolution and also many of Drew Kojak's suggestions. Specifically, I would like us to have a more ambitious goal and remove the word net from zero greenhouse gas emissions to just say zero emissions. I think that's more ambitious and appropriate for us. I also support the 6 suggestions regarding increased information on electronic vehicles, preferential parking, subsidies to low and moderate income folks, consumer outreach on the benefits, EV level 2 and 3 chargers in all new parking spaces and garages, car-free zones, and also partner with other cities and municipalities that have moved along very fast on these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Ruark. I'm a Central Avenue resident and have been for about 23 years. And I'm here also in support of Resolution 2020, the Climate Emergency Response Framework. I know that there are concerns about equity with this framework and about negatively affecting low-income residents in the community. And I think that's a really important concern. But I also think that it's one that we can overcome. And in addition to a public education campaign that I think should come along with this resolution, I think we ought to have a fundraising campaign to help low-income communities meet the frameworks. These days, you know, every morning you wake up and you hear that our national leaders have failed us again on climate change. It can be really depleting. It's natural, I think, to feel helpless and filled with despair. But here's an opportunity where we as a local community can fight climate change, not a moment too soon. And that's where the change is going to happen. So of all communities in the region, Tacoma Park should surely be able to step forward and do this.
Good evening, Mayor Stewart and City Council members. My name is Victoria Gao. I live on Garland Avenue in Ward 2, where I've been for 22 years with my husband, and not for quite so long with my 2 daughters. I'm here to give my strong and unwavering support for the adoption of the Tacoma Park Climate Change Emergency Response Resolution. I don't have any new facts to give you to fill out the wonderful facts that you've given before, but simply to say that at a time of nearly criminal inaction on the part of the federal government in the face of climate catastrophe, it falls to the rest of us to do what we can to save the world for our children and for our children's children. Tacoma Park, of all places, should lead the way. The current resolution needs, if anything, to be strengthened for the future, but it's a great start. So let's do it. If not now, when? And if not us, then who? Thank you for your time.
I'm Tim Searchinger. I live on Holly Avenue. I've lived there for about 25 years in 2 different addresses. And I'm here to also support the climate resolution. I'm not going to belabor things, just 2 points. One is that obviously in a time of inaction, the effort by cities to take a leadership role has been, I think, very useful in the United States on climate change. And as Tacoma Park probably has more climate activists and professionals per square inch of any place on the planet, I think it kind of is important that we do a particularly good job of that. So I'm just in support of what the other comments that were made, but I'd only add one suggestion, which is to have a kind of an ongoing update and revision process, and taking advantage of the fact that we do have lots and lots of people. My focus is global agriculture and climate. Not a particularly important issue for this particular, for Tacoma Park. But the point is we have a lot of people here, and I think just being able to multiply that voice over time with expertise would be another good little point. Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Danielle Dean Ryan. I live at 7102 Central Avenue here in Tacoma Park. My husband and I have 3 kids, and he is putting them to bed tonight, so I can testify before you for the first time in support of aggressive action for the 2020 climate emergency resolution. I'm here to support my neighbors, Drew Kojak and others in this resolution and the suggestions. We are so thrilled in Tacoma Park to be bringing our kids up in a community that is progressive and community-oriented and cares about diversity, inclusion, and equity in addition to the environment. And we're teaching them that they need to do their part to address the climate crisis in a way that leaves no one behind. So I want to thank the members of the council just overall for the attention to racial inequity considerations across the board, and in particular that it's mentioned in the resolution, and to make sure that it is strong. I want to just make 2 key points. One, attention to the underserved and economically disadvantaged is not just a moral issue, though of course it is that. It's also a strategic and practical issue. We've seen that when we address equity, and we increase the odds of success in addressing the climate crisis overall. We saw in Europe what happened when attention to the poor was not well considered. We see oil and gas companies in the US having the temerity to pretend like they care about the poor. Why? Because often environmental policies have a weak link on equity that they then exploit. And our calls to save future generations will ring hollow if we don't pay enough attention to equity concerns. In the resolution, as we look to make both the climate response strong, but also the equity piece strong, I just want to finish with a second point, which is the resolution has to also call for clear measures, tracking, timelines, and process for ensuring accountability. Just as with your greenhouse gas emissions, you have to make sure that there are measures, tracking, timelines, and accountability. You measure what you care about. It's the only way to know how we're doing and to course correct if needed. Thank you so much for allowing me this time to speak out in strong support for the climate emergency resolution that is equity and has equity included, and thank you for your service.
All right, any other? I think they're just leaving.
Good evening. I'm David Blackstein from Sycamore Avenue, Ward 3. I want to thank the mayor and the council and the staff for all your work, and also to thank my fellow members of the previously silent majority of Tacoma Park residents in support of the resolution. Today I'm speaking as a representative of members of the technical working groups established by Montgomery County to develop climate action plans under the county's climate emergency resolution. And I have a letter that's signed by half a dozen of us. And so I'll just summarize that. First of all, we express our strong and enthusiastic support for the proposed action plan and for the framework resolution. The draft plan is entirely consistent with the recommendations that we and our colleagues are developing to implement the county's goals for reduction and eventual elimination of greenhouse gas emissions. I encourage you to come next Thursday at the rollout of the county plan. We encourage the council to adopt the resolution rapidly and move forward in drafting implementing resolutions. Second, as was stated by some of our great colleagues here, there's tremendous expertise, not only those of us who are on the working groups, but others in Tacoma Park. We offer our assistance to the City Council and the staff in drafting drafting ordinances and implementation of the action plan. So finally, just some additional points for the council to consider. First of all, the climate emergency really is an emergency. In this case, it's not hyperbole, it's an understatement. So doing the right thing, but doing it late, will not be sufficient. The city's emphasis on the built environment in the proposed resolution is appropriate. It will also be useful for the city to work with the county to develop a plan for reducing emissions from transportation. There are substantial opportunities for adaptation, resilience, and carbon sequestration, but these opportunities must be coupled with aggressive action to cut emissions. There are also substantial opportunities for Tacoma Park to develop and generate solar energy, whether within the city boundaries or elsewhere. Transition to net zero greenhouse gases is an imperative that will provide economic opportunities, cost savings, and improved health for Tacoma Park residents. Leadership in climate action in Tacoma Park will help speed action across Montgomery County, other communities in the United States. But there are other communities that are taking aggressive action, and there are considerable studies of economic impacts, racial justice. We don't have to do all the studies ourselves. And finally, to close with the quote outside the door by Sammy Abbott, if we can't make it happen in Tacoma Park, there is no help for the nation, and I would add, to the world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comments this evening?
Good evening. My name is Michael O'Hora, and I am a friend of Tacoma Park. And I too want to thank the mayor and the staff for having worked so hard to advance this plan. Tip O'Neill said that all politics are local. And when it comes to environmental action, that's more true than ever. I too sit on that advisory committee that David spoke of, but I would say we should decouple that, and that we should work for what's best for Tacoma Park, because this is where we live. This is the land and the streets and the trees that we've chosen to make our home. And we do have an obligation to our children as well as to ourselves, and that the longer we wait and the more fear that we show in terms of being unwilling or unable to move forward, the harder it's going to be for us. I don't want to go into climate temperature change and die-offs of species, but the truth is that we're already way behind. And I would just offer myself to say that I am happy to live around a group of people who are so committed to this task, and I certainly will offer myself to anything that I can do to further that advance. I think that the fear is misplaced. I think the future can be bright in terms of a climate remediation program, and I would just say again that I'd like to help. I'd like to be a part of this. And finally, I don't know how this happened, but I found myself writing an article about the merchants in Langley Park who had been impacted by the forever construction on University Boulevard. And it was you who told me that on weekends their foot traffic is down 70%. I would say that as you know, Janelle Wilkins, our delegate for District 20, is helping. That Councilmember Hucker has expressed an interest. That you have friends in this group called the Purple Line Citizens Advisory Group, who is working with the businesses on Bonifant Street. You know, when this thing comes out of the library, it will turn onto Bonifant Street. And there are lots of avenues that we should pursue in helping this along. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth Thompson. I'm at 419 Elm. And I'm also one of the co-chairs with John Ackerley of the Committee on the Environment. I want to express our continued support for the resolution. We're so glad that you guys are continuing to move it forward in such a thoughtful way. We know that it will help to create a more resilient and energy efficient Tacoma Park, which will benefit everyone. In particular, we're really in favor of the work that the council is doing to think about how it impacts people across the income spectrum in Tacoma Park, to think about how funds can be used to incorporate that public process. We encourage those funds to be both educational and specifically how to implement things. We know that with all of the amazing expertise that we have in Tacoma Park, if we can focus not so much on the like, what should we do next, or worrying energy, and more on the like, here's how we get it done energy, we think that would be most beneficial for the city and for all of our residents. Lastly, on the resolution, thank you just for bringing all of your individual and collective intelligence to the process. I know you've listened to tons of comments from lots of different people, and you're doing your best to bring that together. Thank you for going to Annapolis. Thank you for talking with the county and trying to bring all of that together in one thing that benefits the city. And then just as a side note, Councilmember Kostick, thank you so much for thinking about the bus routes. Certainly a letter from you guys means more than a letter from the COE, but if we can do anything to support that, we're glad to put together something quickly and in support that's official also. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Adam Bodner, 7125 Carroll Avenue. I'm also here to speak in favor of the resolution. And I would just like to offer that if the council and the community thinks it's the right thing to do overall, then our attention can be directed to making sure that any expenses associated with implementation are as equitably allocated as possible. And I think in this community, that's definitely a achievable goal. Thank you.
Great. Any other public comments this evening? No? All right, we're going to move on. Our next item tonight are council comments. Any comments from my colleagues? Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of announcements on Friday at 3:30 p.m. here in the auditorium. There's going to be a forum on climate change. It's being sponsored by the Adventist Community Services and the Youth Council. On Saturday, the 22nd, at 2 p.m. is a memorial service for Norman Ridgway, who received the proclamation tonight. And on Sunday, the 23rd, the life of Lee Jordan is going to be discussed and presented. He was a local activist, very active in organizing youth programs in Tacoma Park. And that program's at 2 o'clock on Sunday, right here in the auditorium. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilwoman DeBala.
Yeah, a couple of commenters stole my thunder, but some of these things might be worth repeating. So on February 27th from 6 to 8 p.m., the county work groups on climate change are having an open house to present their recommendations and to get feedback and discussion from people. I think several of us will be there, and then I urge all of you to come and talk about what the county can do more of, since many of you are quite interested in this topic. Also, someone mentioned Azalea Awards, vote by midnight on Thursday. There are 11 categories, lots of your neighbors, including in Ward 2, to vote for. I also want to mention on March 5th, one more time with feeling, Thursday, March 5th, Lincoln Avenue traffic calming, 7 o'clock here in the hydrangea room. And to say that on Larch Avenue, including presumably a number of other places in the city, there'll be traffic counting going in next week? Next week.
Probably, at this point, probably next week.
Yeah. So when you see this, the cords in the road, don't flip out. We're trying to get a sense of how it goes. Coming off of University in New Hampshire these days. And last thing, if anybody in the council's going to Rockville tomorrow night for the MMO meeting with the county executive, please let me know so we can carpool. Peter.
Yes, I'll be going. That's the time when we're supposed to learn something about tax duplication.
Councilwoman Kostick.
Thank you. A couple of quick things. I attended the District 20 night in Annapolis Monday night.
Monday.
It was a great activity. Councilmember DeBala and Councilmember Kovar were also there. Councilmember Hucker was there from the county, and of course our delegates and senator were there. It was a great opportunity to hear from them and talk about all of their great work in Annapolis and the many bills that they're working on. They're doing some really great stuff, and we're really, really lucky to have them as our representatives there. I also attended a Transportation Planning Board meeting today, and I have a couple of quick updates from that. Some good news from the federal level, which is rare. I think Councilmember Kovar mentioned this previously, the MWMQAC, how do you say it? The MQAC? MWAC. The Council of Governments Air Quality Committee is recently signed off on a letter, and the TPB voted today to sign off as well on a letter supporting an EPA action that would increase the, or make it more stringent for the standards regarding oxides of nitrogen. And so we're supporting that, and it sounds like it's looking pretty good to go through. I was kind of stunned by the stats that we looked at, which said heavy vehicles and heavy trucks in our region are about 1% of the fleet in our region, but by 2045, about half of NOx in the region would be coming from those trucks. So this would be a great opportunity to move the needle on that and hopefully increase the regulations and make those vehicles cleaner. We also, the TPB staff are working with regional jurisdictions on a series of meetings looking at autonomous vehicles and autonomous and connected vehicles as well, in terms of how they connect with local infrastructure, in terms of stoplights and other features. And they are going to be holding a number of workshops this spring, which I'll be attending and can share out some information. I think it's a really great opportunity for jurisdictions to start looking at working together, so that as these things become more of a reality in the region, we're prepared for that, and we have systems that will work in place to allow for them to work safely. A couple of upcoming events. This Saturday, we have the Shop Purple event in the Crossroads. We've heard a couple of times tonight about the need to support the businesses in the Crossroads during the Purple Line construction, and We have organized it's specifically focused on Ward 3 and Ward 6, but anyone is welcome to come. The mayor will be there, Councilmember Searcy will be there, I believe Councilmember DeBallo will be there, and I will be there. On Saturday from 10:30 to 1 p.m., we'll be meeting in the Crossroads area, and we'll be walking around to a couple of different businesses and finishing up with lunch. And so it's a great opportunity to just meet some of the business owners, talk with them about the challenges they're having, as well as what their businesses are, if they're businesses you haven't visited before. And I really encourage everyone to come out and tell your friends. We really want to get people out there to support those businesses. And finally, on Monday, March 2nd at 7 p.m., the Westmoreland Area Community Association is going to have a meeting here in the community center in the Azalea Room. So I encourage you to come to that as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councilwoman Searcy.
Good evening, everyone. So first, I want to reiterate about Shopping Purple. So as Councilmember Kosick noted, we will have a bit of a walking tour of some of the businesses on Saturday, starting at 10:30. But you can't make it, that's fine. You could still shop purple whenever you feel, the mood strikes you. There's a number of wonderful businesses in the Crossroads area, lots of great food, lots of great shops, and definitely want to encourage folks to definitely go out and patron those businesses. As was mentioned earlier, we have our city manager as well as our economic development manager will be heading to Annapolis along with some business owners to advocate and deal with the press conference on behalf of the city for the purpose of really trying to bring more support for Delegate Wilkins, but also to just bring more attention to the fact that businesses are really hurting. There are things that are happening in other areas, definitely Bonifit, and we've heard about some of the other areas, but those businesses are still suffering. I recently read an article about some businesses on Bonifit that are still struggling because of construction. So if you are interested, there may be a little space available for business owners, particularly Ward 6 folks who are interested in tagging along and kind of joining the city manager and Samira Cook Gaines to go down to Annapolis. There's space available, and definitely feel free to reach out to the city manager, myself, if you're interested, or if you're a business owner, not just in Ward 6, but you're a business owner more generally. This might be a great opportunity for you as well to really advocate. It's the purple line today. It could be a new magenta line tomorrow, right? And so really trying to make sure that we're having a collective approach to how to address construction, state level construction, and the impact that it may have on businesses, I think is critically important, because there is a disconnect between legislators and their feeling in terms of the roles that they have when they're disrupting business due to state level construction projects. So again, want to encourage folks, there's limited space, but if you're interested in joining, please feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you. And just three things I wanted to mention. One, Councilmember Costa-Gordy referred to the District 20 night, and I don't want to repeat that, but just two things stood out for me. One, as she mentioned, we really have an unbelievable four people representing us in Annapolis, and in particular Will Smith, who's the new chair of the Judicial Committee in the Senate, specifically said that he was committed to, by the end of the session, having a list of the most progressive set of legislation and bills that have ever come out of there. And he said, tell me how I'm doing at the end of that and hold me accountable. So I thought that was really striking. Now, just getting out of the committee doesn't mean it'll pass, but I just felt really great to hear that. And of course, Janelle Wilkins, as mentioned, is working on this legislation that would address what Talisha was just talking about. And also, while we were there, Lori Charkoudian, who is the sponsor of the Community Choice Energy Bill, which is central to what we're talking about and what all the people have mentioned today, the climate resolution. So it really felt great to know that we have a good core of people representing our interests in Annapolis. Second thing on climate change also, this coming Monday, the 24th, we're having a community meeting for Ward 1. We're not stopping people with passports from other wards from attending. But it's in the hydrangea room here on Monday, the 24th, from 7 to 9. I'll be there, and I think the mayor is going to be there also. So welcome, all are welcome to talk about any concerns or questions they have about the resolution. And third thing is, and maybe city manager is going to mention this as well, but people who've been watching this sort of glacial movement of the installation of a traffic light at Tulip and Carroll may have noticed that the lights are actually up and they're sort of shrouded in black now. And so it seems like there's these different medieval guilds that specialize in, one digs the trench, one puts in the wires, one puts on the shrouds. I think we're one step away from actually having a traffic light there. And kidding aside, it's a serious safety issue because when you drive up Tulip and you get to Carroll, there's no light, and so you shoot out into the street. But the people crossing, in particular, people who live in Victory Tower, assume that it's safe to cross at that time, and there have been more than a few near misses there. So it sounds like they're supposed to activate it on the 26th, and we'll see. But I think it's, yeah, but it's one step closer. One more guild to do the job. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I have a couple of things. So I was in Annapolis last Wednesday and got to meet the lobbyist from Comcast and talk to him about the wires hanging from poles. And I actually think we may have made some progress on this. And so he asked me to send him a list of pole numbers and streets with wires hanging down. So if people don't know what I'm talking about, which I'm sure you all do, oh yeah, I told him that. I was like, you basically could name every street in the city. So if you know on your street, you see a utility pole and you see black wires just hanging down in the wind, over the sidewalks, where they're not supposed to be, please email me the pole number and what street it's on, and I will be compiling a list over the next couple of weeks to send to them. And we'll see if we can get any action on this.
Thank you for doing that.
Thanks. So, a little hope. The other thing, last Friday, Councilwoman DeBala and I, at the invitation of Bethesda Cares, was able to do a tour of the new permanent supportive housing at Walter Reed. It was really a great tour. There are 77 units with preference given to veterans, homeless veterans, formerly homeless veterans. It's a partnership between the DC government and Help USA, and it's a great location. And we got to meet one of the tenants and residents.
It's a reused building,
Yeah,
right?
it used to be barracks, actually. So it was very interesting to take the tour, see how they created the common spaces and the apartments for the individuals. So, and then lastly, I will be on Eric Bond's radio show on Sunday. So I imagine we're going to be talking about the climate resolution. I don't know. We'll see. And I think that's it for me. I'll turn it over to the city manager.
Thanks very much. I think jumping on the purple train here, there is a lot going on tomorrow. We're working with Delegate Wilkins for a press conference before testifying tomorrow on her bill to help give funds for Purple Line businesses. And I think that's frankly a challenge because I don't think it's been done well in Maryland in the past. So we need to put a lot of pressure on it. But I just want to give some highlights on that little Shop Purple. On Saturday from 10:30 to 1. Yes, there's the little tour, but I want two businesses that aren't on the tour that I want to just call out as being really interesting. Discount Mart's baby section is phenomenal. It's huge. So if you've got baby shower stuff, you need car seats, clothes, whatever, it's wonderful. And the El Alasan cowboy boot place. It's worth walk on the tour, but take a little trip inside and see really neat boots. And I want to buy some boots. Just haven't gone in there. But anyway, there's a lot of places people don't realize are there. They really need other customers since theirs have dropped off. So please help us out. A couple things to just note. There is the SHA stakeholders, Tacoma Vision meeting on February 25th, 6:30 to 8:30 at the Tacoma Park Middle School cafeteria. This is to present a summary of the Tacoma Junction Vision Study recommendations, although I don't think it's going to have a lot of content. It's not a place, it's not a place where others can speak, but it is for the stakeholders group, and the meeting is open to the public. Mentioned the new traffic signal. I wanted to just highlight for a moment the city's partnered with the Ethiopian Community Center to bring an 8-week job search and career planning program to Tacoma Park. It's already started. The first night had 42 participants. Absolutely phenomenal. It's broken into 2 different groups. One is job seekers, the other is skill builders. This is a multi-week program for training to give assistance for residents. It leverages a program that we have also on site, which is the pop-up on once a month on Tuesdays with WorkSource Montgomery, where you get one-on-one career counseling and support, and you can call our Housing and Community Development Department to sign up for that. And frankly, we've made connections and people are already better off, and it really is remarkable. Just a little note about some of the things that some of our staff are doing. 2 of our planners, city planner Jamie Ernst and planning intern Alex Michael, went to an ESRI GIS conference on February 11th and 12th to hone their geographic information system skills for their interactive maps. You've seen that with our bus system. You've seen it with the property tax map that shows the differences in the property tax assessments over time, and we're learning more skills. So you'll see more evidence of their work, and it's just nice to, I think, highlight that they are continuing their education. We do have a new noise brochure. It's online. It will also, part of it is going to be in the next city guide, so people can have it, but it'll be available for folks to identify how to make noise complaints if things are loud, and just also as a reminder that when it does get warmer and the windows are open, please be considerate of your neighbors. And the mayor mentioned the reception for the Little Free Library public art project that's here. I've seen pictures of them. I haven't seen the actual ones. They're cool, really nicely done. So just happy about that and glad to see that. And of course, that'll be on our all library night next Wednesday night. That's it. Thank you.
Great. All right. We will now move into our work sessions. Our first one is on our stormwater fee system, code amendments, and communication approach. And thank you, everyone, for coming this evening. You can continue watching the city council meeting when you go home on Facebook. Continue watching us as we discuss the resolution. And thank you very much for coming this evening.
Thank you as well.
All right. Ms. Braithwaite, we'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Well, this is a follow-up to a previous meeting last week on proposed changes to the stormwater utility fee. As I see it, there's sort of 3 focus areas for continuing the conversation this evening. One is for the council to confirm if this is the direction they'd like to go, or if they want to reevaluate the rate structure. We've proposed a $25 per 500 square foot impervious area fee across the board for all types of property as a replacement to our existing fee, which sets a base amount of an average equivalent residential impervious area per single-family property and uses that as the base unit across all properties. So first would be confirming what the council's preference is for the stormwater rate structure. Second is to review the code changes, which you've seen previously and has been attached again this evening. Fairly minimal, but we do reference our equivalent residential unit in the code. So if we were to change that structure type, we'd need to adjust the code. And also to review some options that we've presented, as well as if there's other ones you'd like to see. There was discussion last week about the city providing reduced rates for a transition year for the stormwater fee for those properties that would have significant change from what they had previously been billed when all single-family properties were charged the same amount. So we've produced a couple of different, I think 3 different options. If there's other ones you'd like to see, we can we can have that discussion. And then lastly, to discuss the communication strategy, we've kind of put out some sort of general framework of what we'd see as a communication strategy to let people know of the rate change, provide an opportunity for public comment, and then so those are the things that I saw in terms of the follow-up conversation this evening.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to add a couple things. There were some questions, and I don't know if we've got all of the computations done yet. I will say that Daryl and I have been really busy last few days.
This pesky budget.
Yeah, you guys aren't doing that yet, but it is really intense in the staff. But when the computations were done and the evaluations of impervious surface were identified, it really did point out that we have undercounted the amount of impervious surface on residential lots. And it does mean that if you're trying to kind of look citywide and you're trying to be fair for all properties, that a little less of the proportion of the total stormwater budget would come from the commercial and institutional properties, and a little more would come from single-family residential properties. That plus the fact that a commercial property, you know, the difference might not make it may not be that noticeable to them, but to a regular taxpayer that's seeing the difference between their current $92 and then go to $150 or $225, that feels like a big ticket item. As we go through this, we've been talking a lot internally about what would a letter be that would go out to each resident that would say, for your property, this is what it was, you know, what it previously was, kind of assumed to be. Here's what this calculation is. Here's what it could mean in terms of a cost. Here are some options that may help phase in those increases if they're over a certain amount. Here's ways that you could identify an appeal of the calculations for your particular property and provide that information in a timely way so that people could testify before you with that information and also see and weigh in on some of those options and what makes the most sense. I also just wanted to remind people that the $92 that goes for the single-family homes right now shows up on tax bills. And so if it's part of your escrow, you don't necessarily see it. It used to be that it was a check that you had to write out. You know, we had the old-fashioned system. Now it's a little bit different. If we go to a system where we do have these higher amounts, my preference is, and I've talked to the finance director about this, my preference is to show that higher amount on the tax bill. And then if there were any kind of offsetting credit, be something that would be a check that we would send to them as opposed to a credit on the tax bill. If it were something that were a long-standing credit for multi-years, it makes more sense to add it to the tax bill. There's a cost associated to that that's fairly significant. The amount of work from our finance department is manageable for a 1 year or perhaps 2 year process of phasing in some of these amounts. So just kind of wanted to give a sense of things that we've talked about internally. And I think that part of the reason for showing the full amount on the tax bill is so that people don't get surprised the next year when it's, you know, if it goes up. I want people to recognize kind of what that calculation is, and if they have an issue with it, to come in and talk with us. I did hear Mr. Krutowski's recommendations this evening. The idea of some kind of a little board, appeals board, if there were a lot of things, or a committee or something, you know, that may be something we want to consider. My guess is that there's actually not going to be that many appeals, but it's worth seeing what happens.
Yes, I think the ordinance does have language about the appeal process currently in it, so we wouldn't need to establish that. It already exists.
Right.
If you wanted to set up something different, we would have to do that. Again, some of it will depend on the volume of appeals. We get very few now. And so the issue would be, I would recommend that we continue the current process, which is it's incumbent on the property owner to provide whatever survey or other data to show the impervious area on their property. They submit that to the city. We do a field visit, compare what our records show with what their records show, and then make a determination and communicate that to them. It would not be a time-intensive thing in that the city, at least currently, does not oversee that survey work. We accept the information provided from the property owner in evaluating the impervious area. One of the things that we probably will need to enhance is I've had questions from people about, I have a gravel driveway, does that count? Well, gravel driveway is a pretty impervious surface. So we'll probably need to provide some definitions of what is considered permeable versus impermeable. You know, if you have slate over stone dust, that's a pretty impermeable surface. You may have thought it was permeable, but unless it has been excavated with a subbase of gravel and underdrain, it's not a permeable surface, it's a impermeable surface. Water runs off it to the surrounding area. So we may have to add some information like that, either on a web page or in any information we send out.
Actually, Ms. Braithwaite, while you're on this, because that was actually something that came up in public comments as well, and so I think it might be useful for folks as we're having this conversation. We talk here about impervious surfaces, the difference between impervious versus impermeable, and why we're measuring impervious.
The difference between impervious and impermeable, those are the same. The difference between impervious and permeable are different.
Yes, we did
So I
have
don't-
public testimony that there's a difference.
There's
so
a
we
difference
can see
in-
what that definition
Okay,
is.
we'll have to
Somebody
look
says.
into that.
Okay.
We use those terms interchangeable. So we'll have to identify what those are. It might be a misunderstanding on our part of.
And I think the testimony was that it was just a preference of term, not that there was any difference.
Yeah. We probably use them interchangeable because for some folks, permeable, impermeable versus pervious, impervious. It just depends on which word you like to say. But they basically mean the same thing.
Great. All right, so I think there's three things on our plate tonight as we discuss this. One, whether or not there's agreement to revise the rate structure, moving in this direction. That's the first thing. The second is whether or not there are questions on the code as it will be amended. And then the third is a discussion of what the fees will be moving into this budget year and how will, did I get all of them?
Yeah, that's right, except I think one of the things, we certainly want to have some direction about fees and things, but that actually gets set during the budget process.
Right, yeah, so that when we, all right.
I think that part of the discussion will be what type of assistance or fee reduction you would like to see, whether it's 1 year, 2 year, or whatever, because we'll need to kind of figure out the dollars for that.
Right, for the budget. Okay. So first on revising the rate structure and moving towards charging $25 per 500 feet of impervious or impermeable area.
Again, it's not so much the $25 per, but
Right.
the use of the like a
Right.
500 square foot unit.
Okay. Any comments, questions on that? Councilwoman Caustic?
Yeah, I have a bunch of questions, and they may be a little cross-cutting across a couple of these different things, but I appreciate the digging on the commercial aspect, and I'm still interested in better understanding how much of a reduction this is for the commercial properties versus how much of an increase across the residential. And I think what the city manager said earlier is sort of what I'm struggling with a little bit, which is the idea that maybe $100 or a $200 increase for a commercial building, which is pretty large, or a multifamily building that has multiple families living there, is not felt so much as a $100 or $200 increase for a single family who is paying that. And so I'm struggling with that a bit, and I'm interested in understanding better how the distribution on that works.
Sure.
And whether there is, I like the idea in theory of it being connected with how much pervious or impervious space you have on your property, but I think just how it's structured is worth looking into a little more, and how it's divided up between commercial and residential. And also, I'm curious also whether, in looking at how much impervious space a property has, whether actually, and I have no idea if this is the case or not, but whether like a large parking lot, for example, that might be in a commercial building is actually potentially maybe creating more of a challenge for stormwater for the city than, say, the same amount of impervious space in a block of single-family homes where it's more spread out. And maybe there's more opportunity for some of that water to run off onto, pervious space there. So I'm thinking through those things, and I'm just interested in understanding that better.
Sure.
I also, yeah.
If I can just interrupt on that, one small piece is also it's so different by property, and when you have a larger commercial property, they may have gone through a site plan process that actually handles the water much different than a residential driveway. So some of it, it may be a property by property determination, less than a categorical determination.
Okay. The other thing is, I'm just hearing from a lot of people who I think this is just a hard concept to understand. And I'm hearing from a lot of people who feel like it is an increase in the revenue that the city is getting, but it's not.
Right.
It wouldn't change really our programming and what we do, but it feels like that because it's more that people are paying. So that I think is a real struggle in terms of communicating this and why this is happening. And I've also gotten a couple of questions, and I'd be interested if you can address sort of talking about what the $700,000 that we do have, what that's used for, and why it's important, and also how that has changed over the years. I know we had the increase in the fee for single-family homes just a few years ago, and if you could just talk a little bit about why that happened and why this is the amount that we need.
Sure. It's largely driven by our requirements from state law for treating certain amounts of impervious area and meeting our requirements. On a legal level, based on our permit, the city has a water discharge permit granted to us through the state as a municipality. It's called an MS4 Phase 2 permit. And so we have certain requirements that come into play based on that. We've just recently, as of last year, gotten our next permit, which will be for a 5-year period, and it increased the requirements, though we knew that they were coming, so there was no particular surprise in the new requirements. That puts into a legal framework the requirement that we provide treatment for 20% of area that was untreated. So existing impervious area that's untreated, water runs off down into the street and through the stormwater system. We now have to capture and treat 20% of that runoff by 2025. We've been working on this since 2004, so we've made great strides in that, and that's part of what that program budget does is enable us to install bioretention facilities and stormwater treatment facilities. So that's largely what it's about. We've been putting out a 5-year capital project improvement budget that the council reviews at each budget year that lists stormwater projects. Those are our capital projects, so those tend to be new installations, new treatment facilities, or very potentially large projects of adding treatment capacity. So the council sees those on the capital budget every year. In addition to that, we have, and that's generally $200,000 to $250,000 a year is what we plan for that. When we get grants, it's oftentimes associated with those types of large capital projects, like we did for the Flower Avenue Green Street project, where we received National Fish and Wildlife Federation money for stormwater treatment. So grant money can also supplement this, but as a base level, based on a list of projects and our goals of reaching that 20% treatment by 2025, we have a list of both stream restoration projects as well as treatment projects that we've identified and put in a year schedule over the next 5 years and beyond. So we have those capital projects. In addition to that, we have subcontract and basic maintenance projects. So also our permit requires us to do an inspection of all dry weather outfalls every year. It used to be every 3 years. Now we have to do that annually. And what that means is a dry weather outfall is one that if it hasn't rained for 3 days, you're still seeing water coming out of the pipe. So basically, we work with a contracting engineering firm that visits all our outfalls, and those are pipes that have an exit into Long Branch or Sligo Creek Parkway. They identify those yearly. They go through all the outfalls, identify which of those have dry weather flow. It's generally 15 to 18 outfalls in the city have dry weather flow, and then they test them for certain parameters of water pollutants, and we have that information. So we have our whole history of water quality testing, which used to be every 3 years and is now required to be annually. So that's done. In addition, the city has a very aggressive program of video monitoring and cleaning. So we use a consultant, an engineering firm that does that video pipe inspection. There's not a lot of jurisdictions that are able to do that, but because we are, fairly well contained and know where our system is, it provides a wealth of information on the structural integrity of the pipes, as well as puts people in the field to clean inlets and pipes. Our original plan was to get through the city on a once every 4-year cycle, so we do a quarter of the city of the year. The costs for that type of service have been increasing, but our budget remains about $50,000 to $70,000 a year that goes into that work. So it's now more like 5 or 6 years for us to get fully around the city. So what that means is when someone says, hey, I have a sinkhole in my yard, or I think your stormwater pipe is creating a problem, we can actually pull up video feed and look when the last time we did it, and it's typically in the last 4 or 5 years, if not sooner, and it helps us investigate those types of issues, as well as just making sure of the integrity of our system. We know that we inherited a stormwater system that ranges from 100 years old to 1 year old. So it's not to say that all the 100-year-old pipes are falling apart. We actually, we have incredibly hand-built slate stone trenches that are 100 years old that look incredible. They're works of art. If you've ever looked down into a sewer and see these sewer manholes and sewer brickwork, it's amazing. So we've got that same kind of stuff in the stormwater field. We also have had what was popular in the 50s was to put corrugated metal pipes in the ground. They don't work so well. So metal doesn't tend to hold up very well carrying water under the soil. So those are all deteriorating, and as we identify those, we replace them. So some of the money goes to that. And then we also have the funds for the project that goes into all the design and engineering for these construction projects. So they have to be designed sometimes in-house, sometimes by others. We usually need to do survey work, we need to do water quality testing, and we need to do as-built inspections for things that are built, and then also put that information on our GIS system. So we have part of the funds that do that. And lastly, the staff associated with our stormwater program is half of our city engineer. So our city engineer's salary split 50% in Public Works operating budget, 50% in the stormwater budget. That position oversees our street resurfacing programs and civil engineering programs, as well as the stormwater programs. So you have some salary. We also had a percentage of our construction manager. I believe 25% of the construction manager is covered in the stormwater budget. And when we had a special projects coordinator, a portion of her salary was also covered in that budget. So those are the kind of things that the stormwater fees cover. Each year when we do the budget, we put out a ton of information about our stormwater budget and what it does and what's planned for that year. So we have a list of projects, both maintenance projects as well as new capital projects, and then just the overall information about the TV inspection and the water quality testing. So those are the kind of things that go into the budget. To get back at your question about commercial versus, or shouldn't say commercial, I should say single-family residential versus all others. And I can provide you the original report that Black & Veatch did, and that when we first talked about this, I guess in January of 2018 or whatever, we had provided that report. It goes into great detail about the number of properties associated with the fees and how many there are. And the commercial properties, I don't have the percentage, but those non-residential single-family properties number about 162 relative to previously 300 and 3,687 that were residential. That also included 211 multifamily. So by far, the vast majority of the individual properties, parcel by parcel, are single family with a very small percentage of commercial. However, the impervious area that those commercial facilities represent, it's not quite 50%, but pretty close. It was kind of like 40, 60, 45, 55 in terms of commercial providing more than single family. So with the new analysis of our impervious area actually being greater for single family properties than what we originally assumed, that affects that divide just slightly by about 5% or so. So it actually gets it a little more closer to equal. But what that means is when you actually have more impervious area represented by the individual single-family properties, their equitable portion of that fee would reflect that amount of square footage. So there is some shifting rather than slightly more from commercial than residential. It's now going to be a little bit more evenly divided, and we can get you those percentages. Susie had sent some information out that based on Black and Veatch's study, about $50,000 more were going to be transferred from commercial to the single family as a result of that larger impervious area. And I can't remember if there's any more. We can go way down into the rabbit hole with this if you'd like, but I think suffice it to say that there is a slight shift based on the actual impervious area that affects that ratio of who pays the most. The commercial property owners by far are greater land mass and a far smaller number, so they have a larger percentage of the fee structure that they'll pay. Though we do have some commercial that are fairly small. We just have some very large ones like the former hospital and the Columbia Union College that have the greatest portion of the impervious area.
One of the things, though, that we have always maintained that people pay a fair portion. And so when particularly institutions or whatever challenge us on that, we're like, well, it's just a calculation. It's a fair calculation. Once we now have this new statistics, we can't just say, well, we still want you to pay more. So, just to help out the residences. So I think that that's one of our issues too, is that now we actually have the data, and so we do need to identify how we fairly deal with that data.
And just in case we haven't been clear, there's questions about that. It's not as if anything drastically changed in the impervious area. It was just the quality of the data that we were able to get. Previously, when we established our equivalent residential unit, it was done based on the property footprint, so nothing else. So, it was really used by the tax records and what the tax record says the square footage of the property is. Now with the aerial footage and the planimetric information and the GIS data layers that the county has, they can actually drill down to find driveways, sheds, walkways, those types of things. So when the change is really from getting a more focused look at what the actual structures are on the ground that would be considered impervious. And so, as with anything, as the quality of the data you get improves, then it adjusts what our assumptions are about that.
Thank you. That's really helpful to get that overview, both of the program and the commercial residential. I'd just be interested in getting, I don't want you to dig in super deep, but I'd just be interested in getting more of the exact numbers. And
sure, we've got some charts that Black and Veatch provided,
awesome.
So let me get those to you. And
then I just have two other very quick things. One is, I am a little concerned about the number of appeals potentially. I'm not sure if it will be, at least during the initial changeover. I think after that probably it wouldn't be too many. But I do think during the initial changeover, I actually do think there may be a number, because I've heard from a lot of people who have said, I looked at the map and I'm concerned about how this was measured. It doesn't seem right to me. So just looking at the staff time involved in that. And then the other suggestion that some people have provided was to look at maybe providing some credits to offset the fee for people who install infrastructure on their property to manage their stormwater. I'm not sure if there's a way to do that, but maybe it could be a way of incentivizing people to manage more of their stormwater on property and have a better outcome for that. So that might be something to think about.
Yeah, more easy to implement if we went this direction would be remove some impervious area and we can affect your rate. So that would be the first line of more simple. If you have a concrete path or parking space and you turn it into a permeable paver parking pad with water storage underneath, then we can deduct that square footage from your property. So those will be fairly straightforward. The issue with we provide I've put in a rain garden, I can provide a certain level of treatment, therefore you need to credit me. The county does have a credit program that we can look into to see sort of how they manage that. One of the challenges with that, and one of the things becomes really time intensive, is in order to grant that credit, we then consider it one of our treatment facilities. And so as soon as it gets identified as a treatment facility, we have to do an inspection every 3 years. We have to have a record for what that is and document it, give it a code. And we have a vast database that we need to now provide to the state for all our treatment facilities. So it kind of kicks it into a more formal situation, which isn't to say it's unheard of. We have that now for any new property that's being developed. They have stormwater structures that are labeled, identified, and where they have to do send us a covenant of a maintenance requirement. They have to respond to us with their inspection and treatment. And I must say, we have about 50 some of those for private property, and it is like pulling teeth to get those. And those are only the ones that have been established in the last 10 years. To get them to do the every 3-year inspection. What's that?
Those are on larger properties.
It could be a single-family property. Okay. Anything greater than 5,000 square foot limit of disturbance has to have a stormwater permit and has to meet the stormwater rules.
And I would say, Councilwoman Costick, Ms. Braithwaite did give us some numbers last time, and from what I understand about instituting this, we would have to increase the staff. So we have to offset like what the credits would do in terms of then what we'd have to actually increase the stormwater fees. And we did get some data from the county on that, so we can resend that out to everybody.
Yeah, we did. I did spend some time talking to the county's folks that run the Rainscapes program about sort of how they operate the program, and they're spending about $500,000 fiscal year 20 towards offsetting the cost, and their goal is to provide 50% of the cost of installation for those projects. But then they do require them to be permitted and do the inspection reports, and they become part of the permanent record of our treatment or the county's treatment facilities. There was something else I was going to mention with that. I mean, so it's possible. If you're evaluating somebody's challenge about, I don't think I have that much impervious surface. So they provide us their plat map, they measure out their property, they say this or that, they show us the record that yes, that driveway is permeable, it's got a 3-foot storage chamber underneath, whatever it is they've got. We can look at that, do a quick field visit, confirm yep, nope, and arrive at a number. If you're actually wanting to verify someone's treatment capacity for their bioretention facility or their dry well or their under drain that they've established, then we have to make sure that it's functioning per specifications, and we need to be involved in the construction of that. We have to have as-built certifications. We have to go inspect it and make sure it's still functional. So it ends up having a few more requirements for us to check in and be more further involved. It's not just a simply comparing of engineering survey data with what Black & Veatch says and doing the math. It's actually much more involved. So it would just take some additional staff time. In terms of evaluating challenges to the rate, I mean, it could be as simple as almost an accountant type person or a finance person, because it's really going to be check your information against what we have, determine what the rate is, and, you know, so I'm not wanting to discount that it may be time intensive, but it's a different kind of evaluation. And really the onus is on the property owner to provide full records. If they provide full records and document what they've got, I don't see us walking out with a tape measure and walking around their properties and measuring it. Just similar now to when someone applies for any kind of permit. If it's certified, stamped by an engineer or a surveyor, we assume that that information is correct and proceed accordingly.
So one more quick thing. So in terms of the survey that you mentioned, would that be for an appeal? They would have to have a certified, it wouldn't be them doing the survey. They would have to have a certified engineer do the survey.
Well, it
Is that
depends
correct?
on how complicated it is. If they're wanting to say that they're, you know, some structure is permeable versus impermeable, then they'll have to show us construction documents related to how that was built. So typically that would be their contractor or some engineer certifying that. In terms of the detail required, if they had their, you know, property plat record and the measurements on that documented, I think that would be sufficient.
You
I
know,
think
they might say, we took the shed down,
Yeah.
whatever, well, then that's a pretty easy photo, I mean.
Yeah, so it could be done. I mean, every case is going to be a little different. I think the bigger error for discussion is going to be those folks that think they may have something on their property that's permeable that actually isn't. So we'll have to be real clear about the definition of what is considered permeable and what is not. And not just my opinion, it won't be Daryl's opinion, it'll be whatever the science related to permeability provides in terms of what's permeable or not.
Councilmember Kovar?
Thank you, and thank you for answering. I sent a number of email questions, as did Councilmember Cossack, and those were useful. One area sort of overall concern, and then a few specific questions or points. It is coming, the announcement of the potential increase is coming fairly short in terms of when.
Councilmember Kovar, can I just interrupt you for 1 second?
Yeah.
I want to make sure that if it's on the rate structure, and then we get to the fees, if we could just talk about whether or not we are favoring or opposing the rate structure change, if that's okay.
Well.
No, but I guess I just want to get clarity on that and get questions on that before moving on to the fees, because if we don't agree with the rate structure change, we don't necessarily have to talk about the fees. So that's why I just wanted to split our discussion tonight.
I'm not 100% sure I see the difference in what I'm.
Well, because
trying
if
to
we
find
don't
out.
agree with changing the rate structure and want to just continue with our old rate structure, then discussing the fee increase and what information gets sent out to people is a moot point.
Right, I think to determine what, to me, to determine whether the rate structure makes sense, there's background questions about how the program works that I
Fine, okay, go
wanted to
ahead.
understand.
Okay.
And maybe I'm
No,
not.
no, go ahead. No, I was trying to keep our conversation so that, but go ahead.
Well, so I'll try to get quickly to the question. There's an overall question, which is how this fits in with what we're doing on climate change. And I think for a lot of people, particularly in 2018, when we had this record rainfall, which fortunately we didn't have last year, I think they see stormwater from, someone else's property flowing into theirs, and it may just seem to be not really consistent for them to be paying more money for that. And that's how people are going to perceive it. I think in terms of the appeals, there haven't been many appeals, because everybody's paying the same thing, so why would you appeal? I think there probably will be a lot of appeals, at least the first, depending on how we phase it, depending on how the first couple of things go. I would say if we can get to the communication part of it later, but I do want to understand about the 700,000. And so you said 700,000 is the program and the portion of the staff that applies to it, but then there's extra Is the 250 separate from that?
No,
which is-
that's part of that
that's part- So
700,000.
700,000 is the
Yep.
total program, capital,
That's our-
staff,
yep.
and
Yeah.
annual maintenance.
That's
and
our
all
goal,
that.
kind of like we have a $500,000 for street restoration
Right,
every year.
right. But so,
700,000 is our goal for
The part that I
stormwater.
didn't understand was, so it seemed like from the Black and Beach report that the total impervious area practically doubled, right? So that means we have way more than we realized, because we have better data now.
Yeah,
But we're
the,
s- but
yeah,
we're
the
still-
data was really different for the single family,
Right.
less so for the commercial and non-residential.
Right, but
That
the-
was a little more accurate, so
But the
we had
total
a real,
amount went up for the city.
the total
right?
amount of impervious
Yeah,
area,
so
yep.
then does it make sense for us to be paying the same amount? Because don't we have more, I mean, I realize this goes against the question about are people
Sure.
gonna be upset because they're paying more, but
Right.
wouldn't we logically have to
Yeah,
pay
and
more, or?
we've factored that in terms of our plan to the state for meeting our 20% treatment requirements. So we had to change last year's report from our prior understanding of what our base level of impervious area was to our new understanding of what our base level of impervious area. So our treatment requirement went up as a result of that.
But we're paying the same amount of money still for it?
Yes, based on the plan and the program we have established, we feel we can get to that 20% treatment requirement by
Okay.
2025
And so
in
the
that
20%,
existing budget.
a couple of people mentioned to me they heard that might change. As far as you know, the 20% is.
We
staying the
haven't
same.
heard that.
Okay.
It was just established last year. I mean, the counties have been under that 20% requirement for a year longer. So we knew it was coming. It wasn't a surprise. I think it will largely depend on 5 years from now what the, what the condition of the Chesapeake Bay is and what things are looking like in terms of the effectiveness of their overall program.
Right, so, just as far as the credit goes, just a couple more points on this part. I don't think having a credit for installation of water treatment facilities really is going to make a difference, because I'm just thinking in my own yard, when we had some of that done, they cost far more than the increase even at the higher end.
It potentially could
Would be, so I'm not sure that's really the answer, but,
Yeah, it might, it certainly probably won't be enough to pay for it, and, we won't have a nice rate of return, but if you then can pay $25 less a year or $50 less a year as a result of reducing it, you will at least feel like it was commensurate with
Right.
what you did. One of the things in terms of this issue of what do I get for the stormwater fee, I mean, we can always do a better job of putting the information out about the work that's been done, including just what the existing infrastructure is. We have miles and miles of stormwater pipe and inlets and culverts. If we just had that on the stormwater page, it's an enormous amount of infrastructure that exists under the ground. So that would be.
One last question. People ask me all the time, well, why shouldn't we just go into the county program? Not because of the ability to get a credit for the installation of those water projects, although some people might like that, but what would be the difference if we did that?
I think largely our ability to respond to on-site stormwater problems as they exist now. For instance, someone can call us and say, street road water is popping up the curb into my driveway and running down my house, and we then put that on a list, once we verify it, of work to be corrected, and we'll go out and change the person's driveway apron. If we were in the county system, I don't know that anybody would ever see anybody addressing
Or it
that
would
kind
take
of
much, it
problem.
would take much longer to.
Yeah, also with as I mentioned, our system, and part of the Montgomery County system is similar, but our system is very historic, 100 years plus old. So it's a system that really requires the video inspection, the TV inspection. The county doesn't do that. We're one of the few jurisdictions that does that video inspection on a regular basis all around the city. So we're able to respond to blockages, to cleaning, to pipe changes. We've got a programmatic budget for that. So in terms of responsiveness to defects in a system or adding facilities, Talisha can speak to Glenside Drive with the added sidewalk. I mean, basically what we did was site development level infrastructure that was missing, that really should have been installed when that area was developed in the 30s and 40s and 50s. So what we're able to do is, have the kind of funding amount and we're small enough so that we can do a project like that where we add not only treatment, but we're also adding pipes and inlets and keeping the water off of people's private property. And then also protecting the creek, basically what it was before is that area was developed so that there were dead-end roads that shot into the creek. So everything was designed to wash down the street and sheet flow across the road and into the creek. So now we've been able to change that on 4 different intersections, which will be a drastic improvement for the water quality in Long Branch. Obviously, it still has a long way to go because it's not just us that are affecting Long Branch, but that's the kind of stuff that people can do by having a stormwater program in the city. We can just respond more quickly to new improvements needed as well as maintenance issues. When you're, it's kind of the same thing when you're part of a big jurisdiction, they've, I'm sure, got far more serious stormwater issues that they're dealing with on the county level than the types of things that we are able to respond to. So it would be hard for our issues to get high enough into their queue. They have a CIP just like we do, so you identify a problem and then it gets put into the queue. I mean, take a look at our playgrounds and Park and Planning's playgrounds. It's kind of
You
a
nag them
similar
every 3
thing.
months.
Park and Planning has a huge number of playgrounds that they rate, and so it takes a long time for our few Park and Planning playgrounds to work their way up the queue.
Councilmember Searcy can speak to all of that.
Oh, yeah, I have that email on autopilot, just,
Well, I mean, I guess I
Where
would
are
just
we?
say, it's a lot to ask of people to do this, and they're not getting anything extra for it, right?
Well, they are getting
They
a
are.
significant amount
No,
of.
they're getting the same thing they've been getting.
You mean the difference if they have to pay more,
yeah, and I
then
underst-
it's the same program.
Yeah, and I understand the fairness argument, and I don't think I want to say, well, someone who's not contributing should still have to pay the same amount, but it's a change that is just very difficult to say to people, you have to do this, particularly when they saw what happened in 2018.
Yeah, and I think the other thing you could point them to is our, on the city's website, we have a list of our bioretention facilities, and you can see that they're throughout the city, as well as you can see our 5-year plan and where those facilities are gonna go. So it may be that there isn't anything on their street yet, but I would find it hard to imagine that there's not a neighborhood that hasn't either already been impacted by a stormwater project or will be in the next few years.
Right, but if you already have it, and then you're saying, oh, by the way, you have that, now you have to pay 3 times as much, that's a hard, that's not an easy thing to
I
do.
think that the issue here is first of all, fairness, and also, and second, a sense that there really is a connection between how much impervious surface you have on your property and the impact it has on the city's systems. And so it, like many other things, it's one of those things where you don't think about it on a normal basis, and this is one of those times when people would have to think about it. And, they're living in the same house they've always had. I understand how that will feel, but I also think it's important to understand the impact of stormwater, and especially during a climate change discussion, that we really have to, every single person has to think about that, and we have to see if there are ways to address it.
Right, but I think we also said after 2018 that we're going to try to find ways of figuring out how to help homeowners.
I still want to do that.
Right, but there's nothing about that here, and there's.
Not in this element.
Right, and so it's slightly touched on in climate change, and I just think it's important to have these things mesh more than I'm seeing right now.
yeah, I mean, I will.
Tonight, right now, I don't see that.
Yeah, I mean, I will, and I've said this offline multiple times. I think it's important for us to think of all of these things holistically, that you can't just kind of cherry pick different strategies, like it all fits together. So if we ultimately think resiliency and building our capacity to kind of deal with, stormwater increases, it's important that we have to keep in mind that it's going to ultimately result in a need for more resources, and those resources tend to come through in the form of stormwater management fees, right? It's just how the world works. You got to pay for stuff. But I do want to get us back to what I think the first question is that we have. And in my mind, when we're talking about the rate, from my view, we can't ask commercial property owners to pay more than their fair share now that we know that they've been paying more than their fair share. So the question before us is, do we establish a rate where everyone pays the same thing?
And it will be higher.
And it will be higher?
Right.
Or do we make people pay based on how much impervious surface, I'm
Right.
sorry, I'm jet lagged a little bit.
Yeah.
How much impervious
Right.
surface they actually possess. So I think that's the first question.
That's what I've been trying to ask. Yes.
And depending on how we decide to take that first question, so if we say everyone's gonna be the same, right? Then thinking through this fee structure stuff, it doesn't really matter because everyone's gonna pay the same. And we probably would need to think through some added kind of subsidy or some way to kind of help those folks who are gonna be impacted the most with addressing that increase, because everyone's kind of sharing the burden associated with this new change. Now, that's a different approach if we were trying to make folks pay based on how much impervious surface they have, because those that have a lot are gonna see a huge increase in their fees. So I guess in my view, that's the first question that we kind of need to discuss. Do we make, because everyone's gonna have to pay more regardless, because we have to move those funds, or we use taxpayer dollars to fund the gap, which we can't do that either. Like, so I think that's the bigger issue. And again, I could be wrong about that, but.
No, I think you're right on, and we've been kind of focused on this 500 square foot as a unit fee versus the old system, but I just want to reiterate, there are two options in maintaining the system similar to what we've had now. And based on the Black and Veatch study, if we were to charge all single-family properties the same, and all non-residential based on the new equivalent residential unit, there would be $103 would be the fee versus the 92, and single-family properties would be paid across the board. If we wanted to use the equivalent residential unit across the board for single-family and commercial, so then you'd have to, then the charge would be $108.47 per equivalent residential unit. So we've sort of got three transitions. We've got maintain the same way now, where there's a flat fee for all single-family properties, and everybody else pays based on their equivalent residential unit. That would be a $103 fee. If we wanted to say we're going to set our base residential unit at the $2,118, then everybody pays $108.47 per 2,118 square feet of impervious area. And then the process that we've been speaking the most about, which is using this 500 square foot as a base rate, and then you pay based on however many 500 square foot units you have at a set fee. So those are sort of the three versions.
Right, and we've gone over those three versions, and the last time we talked about it, back in September, there was a desire to go in this direction and explore what the fees could be if we do the 500 feet impervious area. So that's what we've done, because back in September, we looked at all those different options, and the council said, okay, we want to dig deeper into this one. So Ms. Braithwaite came back with more numbers a couple of weeks ago, and then we said, okay, we want to see some different options. So before we go further, I'd like to take a hand vote and make sure that the council still wants to go in the direction of having a rate structure that uses the 500 feet impervious area as the measurement.
As opposed to the other two choices.
As opposed to the other two choices. And somebody could say, I want to go back and look at those other two choices, which is fine. But I just want to note that that's what the decision we made back in September of 2019 had instructed staff to look at this. And so before we go much further, I wanted to establish whether or not we wanted to continue this on the fee structure, yes.
You know, my desire, first of all, full disclosure, I have a property that has a lot of impervious area. But I think it's the right thing to do is to charge people who have a lot of impervious area a higher rate than those who don't. And the reason being that that motivates people to take remedial action. And so I want to make sure that if I'm voting for the 500 square feet, that that's what I'm voting for.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. So can I just see a show of hands?
Well, can I
Yeah,
ask
yeah.
a quick question?
Yeah,
though?
go ahead, sorry.
My understanding, and if that is the case, then I support it. But my understanding is that we feel like it's not necessarily going to motivate people because they can't really do that much with their impervious space. Like that's the part that I'm struggling with is some people are going to be able to do something with it and some won't.
Right.
And I do think if you just have a bigger house, then you probably should pay more. But it seems like on some level there's sort of like this base amount that you won't really be able to impact no matter what you do. So, I mean, do you foresee this?
It would be 500 square foot units, so you'd have to remove 500 square feet
Or
of
whatever
impervious.
gets you down to the next, to that next
Next tier.
500 level. I mean, you might just be 20 square feet over and
Yeah, that's
you take
true.
up your,
Because
you
we're
take up your
doing,
patio.
from
Right.
140,
Right.
from 501 to 1,000, anywhere in there, you're gonna get the
But also the way our
$1,000 fee.
system works now, if you have a small house on a small area, you're paying the same amount as money as somebody with a much larger house, and we don't structure any of our other, systems like that. So I agree with Councilmember Siemens that now that we have these data and we can look at this, it seems much more equitable that we're saying like, okay, you're gonna pay according to how much impervious area you have. And they may not be able to do something, and when we get to the conversation, I want to look at the fee structure and think about that. But for most people, if you look at where most people are going to end up, it might be that you're paying 150 instead of the 92, or you're paying 200. And quite frankly, and as we're talking about climate change and everything, raising just the awareness of the footprint that you have in your home, and maybe they can't change their impervious surface, but maybe they could do something else for that area. Maybe then we connect it to the trees or our work or things like that, and we educate people about what does this now mean. But if people are just paying the same rate, we're missing that opportunity to actually do the education on stormwater, to tell people that these things matter.
It also matters when people are buying another house, choosing a house. It's something that is a criteria that they may look at. And when we're doing new construction, which we're hoping to do at some point with things, also it reinforces the need to think about, how much impervious surface we have at a place. So those are kind of longer term goals, but they would be informational as well.
Okay,
So
Councilwoman Costick, Dabala, Kovar. Yeah.
So I think it makes sense in that context, but then I really want to kind of go along with what Councilmember Searcy said, that we're looking at it in a holistic way, and we're really coupling it with those things, because I think otherwise it's just a change that people don't understand, that doesn't get them anything new, that is just, why is the city doing this? So I think it has to be connected with some sort of incentivizing or some sort of education to encourage people to make the change and to find alternatives to what they have right now, so that there's some benefit to them looking at that information and doing something with it.
Councilwoman Dabala and then Kovar.
So of the three options, I will repeat that I'm in favor of the sliding scale 500 square foot blocks that you've got in front of us now. I do think that it's not just communications, as in send a letter to the people whose fees are going to go up. I think there needs to be very clear explanation of what is in and what is out in terms of the numbers, and more importantly, what people's options might be if they want to reduce. And when we get to the phase-in part, some of those fees might need to be phased in over more than 1 year. But we can talk about that later. I'm most interested in ways that we can motivate people to manage stormwater on their property, particularly folks who already have a lot of impermeable area. And I have some program thoughts that various folks in Ward 2 have shared with me, both about hilly streets that could use bump outs and large properties and how we might motivate some of them to reduce their impervious area. So while we're on the topic of education and outreach about how to reduce your impervious area and maybe some credits for folks who are going to be motivated to do it in the future, I'd like to throw the large property piece in there. Talk about some of the old parking lots in the churches, for example, that could perhaps are not maybe going to be part of the opportunity zone, but probably could be looked at. So, in short, I'm in on
The structure we have in front of us.
structure we have in front of us. Thank you.
Thanks. Councilmember Kovar.
Yeah, just three quick things. It's obviously fair to assign it based on what people are paying for, so I'm not against that. I would say, I don't think there's an incentive because the amount of money is just, you know, an extra $150, you're not going to be incentivized to spend $4,000 on a project. So I think it's a fairness question, it's not an incentive question. I think we should try to get to the incentive, and I think I guess we'll have to pass an ordinance, right? I think if we're going to pass an ordinance, the ordinance should have something in it about how this is actually going to contribute to addressing this problem somehow, and link it to what we're doing on climate change, as opposed to just saying, oh yeah, climate change resolution will mention stormwater, or this will help. I think we need to have something concrete in it. I don't know
So when
what
we
that
make the
is.
code changes, you'd like to see a resolution along with that?
Not a
that
resolution,
says-
I'd like to see something in the ordinance that somehow gets us there. I don't know I don't know what the answer is, but it just seems right now, it's just, we've got this data, so now we go with this formula, and we're not really going beyond that. I don't think that's what we should be doing. I think we should link it in some concrete way. I don't know what the answer to that is, but that's just what I'm seeing is missing from this. I think the fairness should be addressed, and I'm not going to vote against that, but I'd like to find some way to link that up.
To link it to climate change. Right, we can, what's appropriate to be what belongs in our code versus what belongs in a resolution, because I think that might be better in a resolution that would accompany the code.
And I know we haven't talked about climate change, but that was actually one of the things that I
Mm-hmm.
think was missing from when we get to climate change and what's there and what isn't. And that was one of the things that I thought was missing. So that might, the next conversation might actually address that.
Okay. So what I'm hearing, and we could do a hand vote, but what I heard from folks is we have some other things to put in place, but continuing the conversation on the rate structure based on the 500 feet impervious area, everyone agrees with that? Yes?
Yep.
You want to just raise your hand? So, all right. So now it's on the record, so we're going this direction. And then I think we can revisit the code language, specifically maybe reviewing it with Councilmember Kovar's request, and that can come back to us, and we can decide if it makes sense in the code versus an accompanying resolution.
Right, and obviously, and I think this does go to your next work session,
Right.
is also how this fits in with public space management, because a lot of stormwater resiliency stuff is in that area, and so it should complement, and I think, it's part of what helps pay for that.
Okay. So does anyone have anything now on the second question I had was the code language that we can just bring up tonight? Because we do need to move forward with this, even if we phase in the fees before we get to the budget conversations. And I know for Ms. Braithwaite to do the Public Works budget, she needs us to provide her with some more direction on this. So is there anything specific that people saw on the code changes?
It's primarily just a redefinition of the base rate and the base unit. And then any place where that is reflected in the ordinance, and then also under the establishment of the fee, redefining, taking out single family as a flat fee and putting it in with the rest.
Great, and then,
Only,
yeah, go ahead.
only to look at impervious
Yeah,
versus
that
impermeable.
was gonna say. And what we should be using. All right, so we'll do that, and we'll revisit Councilmember Kovar's request. on that. All right, so then the last item on this one then is to look at, and this will be decided when we do the budget, but if people have, Ms. Braithwaite gave us 3 different options. Do you want to run through those quickly, what we're looking at here?
Sure. If you have that chart in front of you, what we've got is an option, and again, this is only reflective of the single-family property rates based on the 500 square foot fee. So the first option 1 is that the city pays for 50% of the cost for rates that end up being 175 and above, with the caveat that we don't pay 50% of 175, or it would be lower than what they actually pay now. So it would be the difference between the $92 that people are charged now. The city in those cases would pay $100 towards the person's, the resident would pay $100 and the city would pay that $75. But in every other amount from $200 to $525, the city would pay 50% of that changed price, changed rate over what was previously established.
And there's ways to fiddle with this, because obviously if there are people who would be paying the 125 or the 150, and they'd kind of lose out in this mode, which is why, there could be some minor modifications of this.
Right. And that reflects about a almost $72,000 annual cost if the city were to pay 50% of the fee for folks in the 200 and above, and a portion for those that pay 175. Option 2 is just a kind of the city pays a portion of the fee, not 50%, but a range of $50 to $300 that the city would pay based on the rate that the resident would be charged. So we just kind of arbitrarily established a portion that the city would pay that would keep everybody in the, between $125 and $225 in terms of their annual fee for that first year. And that's a little more than $57,000 in terms of an annual cost. And then the third option is, again, another similar to option 2. It's just the city pays a slightly lesser portion of the fee for those on the lower end. The lowest amount would be $25, highest amount would be $300, to bring that annual cost to $41,575. So this is just all on a formula-driven chart. If the council members wanted to see some other version of this, just let us know and we could run those numbers.
So what we were trying to look at is something that limits a little bit the high numbers, the big jump for folks. Also, we wanted to just get a sense of the magnitude of the impact on the city budget of this. I will say that I would not resist using some of the housing reserve as part of this for 1 year or something like that, where we're identifying this as a way to keep your home affordable, as a way to do that, but I would not want to do it more than a year. So I don't have an easy other pot. There could be some stormwater, there could be some sustainability funds potentially, but we're looking for that for other purposes as well. So, I don't otherwise have money just sitting around.
Councilwoman DeBala and then Siemens.
On the fee structure, I like either 2 or 3, and I would like to see what it would look like if there was a second year of phase-in for the top few categories.
From what to what, or you want to send me some parameters?
Oh, I
Like
don't-
300 and above, or,
Well, I was thinking more like 350 or 375, but yeah, just,
because you get into a fairly tiny number of people that actually is affecting.
right, so the impact might be less, but for some of those people, that could be important. I guess I don't know that for a fact. But I'd like to put that out there as an option to think about. But I think the budget impact and also the subsidy for that first one is too much for me.
Councilmember Siemens?
Thank you, Mayor. First, I would like to say that I'm opposed to reaching into the housing fund, just as a matter of principle. I think it's easy to use money that's sitting around like that, and I don't like to see us do that. And then as far as the question at hand, I'll be abstaining on this just because I find it too personal. Thank you.
Councilwoman Searcy, sorry.
So, question about logistics, and I know we're probably not there yet, but if the fees are worked through the county billing, correct? Would we also have the ability, in terms of an administration perspective, to actually work in this discount through the county, or is it something that we would have to do separately?
Well, actually, that's what I tried to raise a little bit before. We are going to, the information that would go on the county tax bill, we would simply send them a file. Say for this property
Yeah,
tax
and
bill.
it would be linked by tax ID. So
Yeah,
we
it'd be
just
linked
set
by
an
tax
amount
ID.
by tax ID.
We could also have a credit related to that. We could have a reduced number that goes in there, just as the line, but then people wouldn't know what the real number would be. If we had something that had 2 lines, we have to pay for every line that shows up on a tax bill. And it's not cheap, actually.
That's where my mind was
Right.
going.
So that was one of the reasons that I had this discussion about sending a check to those for whom there would be a credit. And this is the place also where I would love to say, if you don't want the check and you want your money to go into the sustainability, into the stormwater budget or something, check here and we'll just move that money in a different place. I mean, there may be some folks who say, you know, I care about this. Sure, the whole 225, I don't need to have a credit for it. I don't know how many people would fall into that category, but I'd love to give the chance. Okay, thank you.
Did you have another question? No. Okay. Councilwoman Costick.
I agree with Councilmember Siemens that I do not want to dip into the Housing Reserve Fund for this. I actually would like to see something a little different, I think, than these options. I'd like to see a little more targeted on the people who are paying the higher rates, because I think a jump even from 92 to 175, I do think we need to provide some support for that if that's possible, especially for people who fall into a category of low income. But I think actually the people who are going to be the most challenged are the ones who are going to be facing the bill of $525 or $450. And so even in this, the kind of the highest scenario here, they still end up paying about $250. And that seems like a bigger jump to me. So I actually think maybe I would increase the lower rate to go to 200 or something like that. But just to target more on those higher changes. And
Now,
then
we also have included there the number of households that affects.
Mhm.
So it is fairly individual on that
It
end.
is. It is, yeah. And then what in terms of, do we have any capacity in terms of focusing specifically on people who might have a more particular challenge in paying due to low income?
So we certainly have the list of people who get our other credits.
That's what I was gonna say.
So we've got
Property
those who
credits.
have the homeowner's tax credits. There's a couple different tax credit lists that are linked by the tax ID that could pop up on that. It's something, I kind of spot check some of that, and there's a handful of people that would be affected.
Yeah.
I would think that would be a legitimate credit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'd just like to take a concerted look at those.
That
those
was
people.
actually going to be something I was going to, if we could, because if we're sending out individual letters anyway, and maybe we could be more proactive if we know one of the households is one that is already receiving benefits from the city, then not putting the onerous on them to then have to, think about that outreach. So I would agree with you on that. That was one of the notes I had made too. So, Councilmember Kovar.
Yeah, I had also thought about this hardship question too.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of sort of maybe seniors on limited income who might be living still in a big house, and this would be one more thing on top of that. I don't know which of the phase-ins I would like. I'm interested in Councilmember Kosik's idea, as well as Councilmember DeBal's idea that maybe it would be a 2-year phase-in for certain cases. But I think something to soften the blow would be important. I also just want to say, where it says the city pays, it's really the taxpayers pay. And so,
Right.
if we do any of these things, the people who get a cut from the 92, which is fairer, we've all agreed, will actually be paying, a fractional infinitesimal amount more, because they'll be paying their share of the 71,000 or whatever it is. And the people who are paying a lot more will be paying a little bit more of a lot more, because they'll be paying some of the 71. I realize it's spread throughout, but I just want to be clear, it's not that the city's paying out of some fund that the city has. It's the same people who are paying. No, I don't mean, it's not about what
Other
it's written as.
taxpayer
right?
revenues.
But I'm just saying,
Yeah.
it's all coming from the same source.
Cool. And I'll just say, I think I'm with Councilwoman DeBala. Option 2 or 3 look to be going in a good direction, in addition to agreeing with the point Councilwoman Kostick raised. Because I think once we do get to some of the, once you get to about like the 275, the numbers really start to drop. And if we can link this and identify those folks who we already know are receiving some kind of credits or things, and do particular outreach to them. Not to go backwards, but I do I do also want to agree with my colleagues who said I think in the first year we are going to have a lot of appeals. Actually, I think all of us are already getting phone calls and other things about like looking up people looking up at their houses and the rate and things. So
Sure. And that leads to a question of, we have a spreadsheet that was provided by Black and Veatch, which establishes what they saw as the square footage. I don't know at what point we want to publish that or make it available. I don't want to cause more confusion, but, just like your feedback on where you'd like to see that, if you want to see it published, or if we want to advertise that people can contact us and we can tell you based on address what we have. And
So right now, we have the map.
we have
Which
the
I've
map,
been
which
using,
gives you kind of
gives you
your
the category and-
potential fee, but not your impervious area calculation.
But you did send that to us too. We do have that too, didn't you? I think.
We have the
I
map.
don't think it's like
I don't think we have
4,000,
the-
it's a.
I thought I looked up something. But
I think it was originally out. I mean, the other part of this, and it kind of depends on how much staff we have to do, but, a letter that goes to somebody could say, our calculation is for your property, it was 2,366 square feet of impervious surface, and that would equate to such and such, and, the council's considering a couple different options, and you may want to weigh in on them.
How hard is it to do that? Individual data in each letter?
It's a mail merge.
Mail merge.
Yeah.
So it's
Somebody
not that
other than
hard.
me
Okay.
does
Somebody
do it,
knows
but
that.
it's a mail merge in
I think
a-
it's just the number of staff,
in
it's
an
not that it's
Excel
necessarily a
spreadsheet,
difficult
yeah.
thing.
It just
Right.
takes some time. I mean, the time is mailing those.
I don't think that's-
Mailing
Yeah.
those individual
That's
letters.
not even in doubt. We have to do that. it
Right.
seems to me.
Yeah,
It's not
I
even
think-
debatable.
I think we should definitely do it. I guess the other point I was going to make about the appeals is also thinking about the money that we have, because, again, as you've noted tonight and previously, the stormwater budget is about $700,000, and we need all of that money to do the projects, maintain our stormwater infrastructure. In this transition year, as we move towards this, even though they'll be on their tax bills, if we do have a lot of people appealing, and then we find, oh, we are needing to go back and readjust some things, I just think we should be aware of that.
Well, I think that, as we kind of narrow down what option you might want, having a budget that says we're putting $75,000, and it partly goes to do some phasing in, and partly it goes to address the issue of appeals. I mean, I think that we would just need to do something like that, and have a little bit of money set aside that just recognizes that.
All right, so is that enough direction for this evening?
Sure.
You want some more direction?
Yeah. All right, so then I guess this needs to come back to us. The code language doesn't set the rate.
Right.
So the code language can come back to us and we can vote on that, if everyone is comfortable with that. Looking at what Councilmember Kovar raised before. And then the actual setting of the rate we can do during the budget.
So I think one question that I have
Mhm.
is, how much information do you want to have to go to residents before you vote on the code language? Do you want to have this, the detailed information sent out to residents to vote on the code language? Or are you comfortable with voting on the code language, but indicate that during your budget process, you will have a special kind of focus on the stormwater billing? And I'm just kind of curious about the timing, because it makes a difference about how we plan this letter and what we say in the letter. Right, I mean, I guess I had assumed that there would be a public hearing on this, because it's a fairly significant
Right.
change in the process, and for many people, it would be a
I guess it's
substantive
hard to
change.
make it tangible for folks if we don't know what the actual dollar amount is we're attaching to this. So that's what I'm having a hard
so
time
that's
like
why-
thinking of that.
So that's why I hesitate about having relatively quick action on the code language without it being somewhat discussed with at least your process.
Well, if I can just
So-
say, oh, sorry.
Okay, yeah, no, go ahead.
That's another reason to think about a two-year phase-in, because we're really cramming
Yeah.
all this into just 2 months, and I don't think people have a lot of time to adjust to that. So that, and Councilmember DeBoer, I'm not sure what the two-year
I was only
phase-in
looking
would
at the
look-
very top
Right,
end. I
but-
wasn't looking at
right.
everybody.
Well, I'm not saying for everybody, but I mean, I think it's a fair point to say that, I mean, it seems like there's only couple of months 3 months till the budget will be done, right? Less, maybe 2.5.
So,
No, I'm sure you don't want to be reminded of that. but-
so I thought, stop me if I'm wrong, I
Yeah.
thought that you were proposing 2 contacts for people, for homeowners. One, this is the proposal, this is what it's based on, the fee structure, here's some information on how you can, if you are in one of the high categories, how you can, in the future, adjust your fees. We're looking at a phase-in, and here's the public hearing date, or something like that. And that I think could be soon. And then the second one is the details once the fee structure is adopted. So I'm not getting what the problem is with the first one.
I think,
Because it would say 500 square feet unit, I mean, I'm asking.
I
Well,
think,
the first
I
one would
think
say
the
we're-
issue is it doesn't make any difference to somebody to see something, we're switching from this as a equivalent residential unit, which nobody can think of,
Right.
to a 500 square feet. It's still, it's, unless
there's
it's
a map.
associated with
A dollar
numbers
figure.
and a couple approaches, I think that all needs to be laid out as part of an advertisement with an acknowledgement that there's a chance for you to testify before the council on that. And then, let's say everybody comes and say, we don't care about the high-paying ones, we just don't want to go from, $92 to $150, and we want you to put the extra money, in that as a phase-in. I mean, somebody could say, whatever somebody says, you may change your process, then I think we have to notify people what their real situation is, and that would come kind of afterwards.
So the first mailer that goes out to all households would be, council is considering this change.
Right. And here's a couple options, and here's some of the things that
Well,
are being-
well, hold it. What options? I thought there was only one. This is where I'm lost. There's a proposal to do it by 500 square foot
That's
chunks.
Yes,
And-
to describe that, but then
Right.
that there,
And
but
then
then
that
that
has certain, we have data that says, and that puts you in this category
Correct.
versus that category.
Right.
And so what would be the reason you couldn't share that much.
Oh, I think that
And then people would have an
absolutely.
idea.
I think that absolutely. It's, the
Yeah,
options
so-
I meant were that there may be some phase-in options that the council's
Okay,
considering.
so we, all right, all right.
I
I misunderstood before
I'm sorry.
when you told me not to use the $25. All right, I'm good. I think I'm good now.
Okay. So,
I think I'm understanding now what we're
have
gonna
I
do.
now mucked it up? I'm sorry.
No, and I'm sorry, did you?
No, go ahead.
So I get the letter. I get letting people know. I get getting folks here. What I'm not quite getting is whether or not we would need to have tweaks or be prepared to address questions about appeals.
Oh, I think we
And
have to
how
say
that would fit into any additional or new language that would be needed in the, this is called a regulation code. Because that, I would assume, would be different, from the perspective of the single-family homeowner. You know, it could be a approach that was probably used for commercial, that we would now have to make germane to single-family homeowners as well. I'm not 100% sure about that,
We'll
but
double check the appeals language, but I think we absolutely have to mention
Yeah,
that
it's in
there's
there
a,
now
that
under
there would be.
requests for correction, 16.08120. And
Mhm.
it just says a property owner may request correction of the fee. So it's very generic, doesn't specify commercial or other.
Okay.
So I guess the question I have is like working backwards from when we ultimately have to make a decision, change the code, decide on the phase in. I think we need to know what that date is from all of you.
So I'm tired. I
Yeah.
think I'm gonna have to.
Yeah,
get
no,
that
but I
back to
think that
you.
I wasn't asking you for it tonight, but I do think that we need to like have that information to then work backwards.
Okay. I
So
think
that
you're
we
right.
know where the decision points are.
Okay.
And then I think if no one objects, I think the starting to draft this letter, that could also be shared with council so that we
I was planning on
understand like where it's going and what we're doing, and so we can communicate it to folks. So I would say two things. Let's move forward with this, start drafting the letter. We can look at the code language and then figure out the date at which you really need to have a definitive answer from the council
Right.
on things, and then we can work backwards on what's feasible. Does that make sense?
Yep, that sounds good.
Okay.
And we have two phase-in schemes, and so would, would they be part of the,
Yeah, we're
letter
open
and
to,
the
we're
public
open to
hearing.
working with some other options as well. I mean, I think that's something we can talk
so we
offline.
could present two options for phase-in as part of the public hearing process? People could comment on, I'm asking the question, I
Yeah.
guess. And then people could comment not just on the fee structure, but on the potential assistance for phasing it in.
I think there should be a description about a couple options for phasing in. And whether that's
That's what I'm saying, I
whether
guess.
that's a grid or whether that's a description, I think that, you know,
Yeah.
it wouldn't be definitive because you could make a change. But I would like to give some folks about the kinds of things we're talking about.
Yeah, because I think the things we agree on is moving towards this fee structure, and it needs to be phased in.
Right, that's what I've heard, yeah.
The details of how that's gonna happen, we don't know yet.
So I just want to clarify, because I wasn't entirely sure what, you mentioned the options would be presented during, for them to testify on during the public hearing. And I'm
So
just trying to
just-
understand would that be the options for the phase-in, or is that the options of like the fee structure change?
I was not planning on giving the options on the fee
Okay.
structure change, although that certainly would be the first thing. I mean, they could say, look, we
Yeah,
don't
I
want you to
think-
change it, we
right.
want you to keep it as it is, and we recognize that's a higher fee.
Mhm.
But I was talking about a couple options about the phase-in.
Okay, yeah, I think it'd be good to have both of those integrated into it, so people understand the full picture.
Okay.
Okay. Good, all right.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. All right. Now let's move on to our climate resolution. Something easy, right? So on this, just as in terms of background, in January, our sustainability manager presented information on a proposed resolution focused on reducing fossil fuels in the city. We had a public hearing on February 5th. And we continued council discussion at that time. We had 32 people at the public hearing, and probably now close to 20 emails submitted. I'm sure each of us individually have gotten emails, but submitted to the city clerk. Given all of that feedback, Councilwoman DeBala took the lead on revising the resolution, and I'm going to kind of turn it over to her to walk us through the proposed revisions that we have in front of us now.
Thank you, Mayor Stewart. So I thought we had a really good discussion a couple of weeks ago after the public hearing about where we want to go with climate mitigation in the city, and rather than parse through the first proposed ordinance, it seemed, resolution, it seemed to me very useful to try to capture a lot of our thoughts. There seemed to be a fair amount of agreement about some things we wanted to see captured, and to clarify where we are on the process with a revised resolution. So that's what I've tried to do. I want to acknowledge that I had contributions from several other council members, from Mayor Stewart, particularly on the Sustainability Fund and the collaboration methods, from Councilmember Kovar, particularly on resiliency issues, and from Councilmember Kostick on transportation issues. But the idea here is that this could be the basis for discussion rather than the previous resolution. And so what I think this does, and how I think this is different from the previous resolution that was prepared, I think this clarifies that these are our priority strategies. This is a resolution, not an ordinance. I think it clarifies that this is not final decision-making on any particular aspect, a particular strategy, but that this is an affirmation of our commitment as a council to taking action on climate issues, and that it builds on the year of work that's been done to date with the greenhouse gas inventory update that told us that we had buildings and transportation to focus on, the Cadmus consulting work where they laid out a whole bunch of strategies, narrowed it down to 8, 5 of which are retained in this proposal, 6 depending on how you count natural gas. And in that, hopefully a revised resolution moves us forward into agreeing on a policy direction to go back to staff and say, here's the direction we'd like you to explore. So how I think it's different is I think it, as I said, it clarifies what this is and isn't. Hopefully it strengthens our efforts in coordination with other governments and advocacy for state and county state and county work actions that if they do it, I'm getting tired. I'm sorry. That if they do it, it will make our job easier. That was something that came through loud and clear from a lot of people. If they build it, we'll be there on the first floor. It stresses our commitment to collaboration with those who are going to be most affected by these efforts as we sketch out what they look like, how they work, whether they work for Takoma Park or not. It lists a bunch of factors that we want to make sure we think through for each of the strategies as we talk about them. Maybe some of them were pretty obvious, but it probably doesn't hurt to spell it out. And there were some things that folks thought were missing: transportation, new construction and massive renovation, climate resiliency efforts that are related, that are going on in another sphere, tree protection efforts, both the importance of trees as mitigation and adaptation, which is the discussion we've been having in our tree work. You all know already that I feel pretty strongly about integrating with other city priorities and making sure that we don't unintentionally cross ourselves up with, for example, our housing plan. So it adds some things that are missing. It it allows for a lot more flexibility on the dates when things would be implemented. So rather than dates for when a requirement might start or end, it's got a date by which the council, this council, is going to hear back and consider specific strategies, the short-term ones, and that would be this September. And last but not least, it sets up a sustainability fund, a bucket, if you will, for how we might finance upfront costs so that we can all get the benefits out of this that we need to get. And there are a lot of ways to frame that. The Housing Reserve Fund is one model, but there are other ways to do it too. But you got to start by having the bucket in place. So this proposes that to do that. I wanted to talk a little bit about the short-term county actions that they are considering to show how it integrates with this, but for purposes of time, maybe I'll skip that for now. And I wanted to, we talked about the state stuff earlier, about the state bills that would support this effort. And I wanted to confirm my understanding that this resolution would, to some extent, supersede some of the details in the framework proposal and matrix as it was written a few weeks ago, and that staff would then go back and adjust that to conform, and then go from there, particularly with collaboration efforts with different groups that need to be included in the process of sketching out how some of these things work. So I should stop there. I know there's some amendments that people want to make. I believe Councilmember Siemens has one, and there may be some others. But going back to where I started, it seems like this might be a better basis for discussion than the resolution that we had before. No, I really appreciate the efforts of staff for what they did, but now we need to be taking this on and figuring out what we want. So hopefully I've incorporated some of the things that were raised in the last work session.
I just want to say thank you very much for taking on this task and talking to folks and incorporating the changes. So thank you for doing that. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. And I also would like to thank you for the work you put into this. You obviously put a great deal of work into it. And I think you captured the points, at least that I remember from our last discussion. I think the resolution is far better than it was, and I think it's, I'm willing and ready to support it pretty much as you've written it. You mentioned an amendment. It really isn't to the resolution itself, it's just to the matrix.
Okay.
I think that, I mentioned this last week, I think that we need, beyond the technical steps that we have in the matrix, I think we need to include that we should consider encouraging and assisting other jurisdictions, and that we should also have a thing in there that we will lobby and support the county, state, and federal jurisdictions advocating for their measures and kind of lobbying to support those, but also to seek funding for local governments and plans such as ours. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you, and I do want to thank my colleague for the redraft and for spending some time talking to me and being open to some of the suggestions I had. I think it definitely has moved in a better direction, and I think in particular, it makes it clear that the resolution is a framework for further discussion and analysis over a period of years, as opposed to something that we are a series of steps we're mandating today. And I think that was actually the original intent of it as well, but I think it was important to clarify that and make that more clear. I have a few things I'd like to mention. And I also, I'm not quite ready to say it's perfect as Councilmember Siemens did, because I'm also got this meeting with the Ward 1 folks on Monday, and I'd like to hear back from them. But I think it's excellent now, and I really appreciate that. And just a few quick changes I can run through really quickly. This is actually in the whereas section where, and Councilmember Siemens just mentioned, we talk about the matrix. Gina Mathias and I talked about this a little bit on the phone earlier today. To me, the matrix is a supplemental document that's not literally part of this, and I think if we were to pass this resolution, it would be okay with me if the staff periodically just adjusted the matrix without having to come back to us every time. That's how, sort of how I see it. I don't know whether we need to clarify that in the document or not. So that's the first, that's one point. Secondly, in the second resolve clause, when we talk about working with all the other county, state, and federal levels, you know, we're very involved in the regional work the mayor does with COG and so on. I think I would just throw that, in there. And then in the sixth resolve clause, and this is the one where it talks about staff preparing implementation options for priority strategies, including the short-term proposed actions and the longer-term ones. I don't know what my colleagues would think about this, but I kind of like the idea of building into that there would be something like a biannual staff check-in and status report where they would come to us at least twice a year and say, here's where we are on all these things. And the next, I assume that would happen anyway, but we ought to me, we ought to just say it.
Just like we do with the police department?
But
Yeah.
particularly since there's going to be this series of steps that they're going to be taking and advising us on, you know, we want to kind of know how they're doing as they go along. Not that Gina and Darrell wouldn't tell us, but I just feel like we ought to have that in there. Several people mentioned in the adaptation and resilience point that it's not just we need to adapt and be resilient. We may need, and indeed the bullet points do this, but we need to actually take steps to mitigate the concerns. And so it would be easy just to, and I can send this separately, easy to slip in the word mitigate there. And I also thought.
With specific reference to tree protection and planting, right?
Well, we can
Yeah,
work it out
okay,
later.
we'll
I'm
work
just
it out.
gonna send that later. And although it's obvious that within this, we're focused on the impact on low-income people, it might be worth a specific reference to that in the mitigation piece, just because that's where the hit will really happen, along with some of the other potential changes we're making. And just a couple other things, and I'm trying to go quick here because I know it's getting late. In the bullet point within that mitigation piece on strengthened emergency preparedness plans and activities, and that's line 138, I broaden that out just a little bit and talk about, to me, things like, you know, preparing and responding to extreme heat and other weather conditions, just so that people understand that that's what we're talking about. And then the last couple other things. On transportation, I think Councilmember Costick's additions are really good. I received something, I think we all did, talking about, instead of saying electric vehicles, saying zero-emission vehicles. That seems to me to make sense, but I would defer to others about that. And maybe a little bit more on public transportation, you know, bus routes. We were just talking earlier this evening about writing that letter, and I think that one might have been slightly under-referenced here. And then there was a same question in the renewable energy piece about electric appliances, whether that should be renewable energy appliances. And Councilmember DeBall did put in part in response to my suggestion that we have something on sustainable investment in banking policies and practices. And I don't know whether that's a sufficient explanation or whether we need to kind of explain what we mean by that, you know, the bank we use for the city and where our money is invested, or if that's evident. But I think I might send in something on that. And just in section 4, toward a fossil-free community. I don't think we mind if people find fossils here, but we don't want them to have fossil fuel-free community. And I'm done.
yeah.
I've talked very quickly. I apologize for
Thank
that, but I
you.
wanted to get through that.
Can I just say one thing? I
Yeah.
just noticed on line 120, both July and September are in here because at the time that I let go of this, we hadn't I had not consulted with staff about whether July was feasible, given our insistence on collaboration in the development of specific proposals. And I have since been led to believe that July is unrealistic, very unrealistic, if we are seriously going to have input, collaboration from multifamily building owners, from renters, from small business owners, et cetera. So that should say September, and it says July and September. I'd also, following up on what Councilmember Kovar said, I would be interested in talking about whether we want to add another date or two specifically for council consideration of medium and longer term actions, or whether we want to do that in September. So I'll stop there. Sorry about that.
Councilwoman Costick.
Thank you. I was suddenly just having a realization about one of my questions, so I got distracted there. So I might not need to ask it. So I agree. I think this is a great step forward, and I really appreciate all the work that Councilmember Dabala has done on this, and the additions and the changes. And I think I appreciate the comments tonight that many residents gave, and I do understand concerns from some people I've heard regarding taking out the dates, and that being a concern. But I think actually it enables us to look more specifically at those dates as we develop these policies and consider really what makes the most sense, and not to be tied by those dates, which we're doing sort of, right now we're looking holistically, and I think that's important, but I also think it will be important to look at each individual policy as we do that. So I have a few suggested additions, specifically on transportation, but a few other things as well. After the second, or I guess after the third further resolved clause, and I think Councilmember Kovar alluded to this, which could be incorporated as well. Our collaboration with the Council of Governments is not really mentioned here, and I would like to mention that specifically, and add I have some language here I can send around, add another further resolved clause that specifically calls out collaboration with Council of Governments and other regional organizations focused broadly as well as on transportation, because I think that's one of the areas where we have a lot of opportunity for collaboration across jurisdictions. Moving down a little bit further in the section, so in the section on priority strategies and the short-term, medium-term, and longer-term proposed actions, I just wanted to clarify, is that the things defined as short-term, medium-term, long-term that's based on the matrix, is that correct? How they're identified there?
My idea was that some of that might change based on what the resolution says. And rather than I try to guess, and rather than burden the resolution with discussing right now what's short-term versus medium-term versus long-term, that would be something I would look to staff to tell us. And if you think that we should do that piece before September, that might make some sense.
Maybe we can just have some language there to make it clear. Somehow it sounds to me a little bit like there are very specific things defined as what is short-term and what is medium and long, and I just want to make sure we have some flexibility on that, particularly related to some of the transportation strategies, since we probably won't be as far along on those things, and just making sure we can define some of those as maybe short-term, but not sort of getting started until a little bit later in the game. So I'll look at that and see if I can suggest some slight rewording to make that clear.
And we might get some staff input on that one too. Thank you.
In the resolved clause, starting in line 128, I would like to add after it says climate change, and there's a comma before the through such steps as the following. I would like to add something that notes with a focus on actions with the greatest impact on greenhouse gas emissions or on climate change, just so we sort of have a priority, a prioritization for how we're looking at doing these additional things and which ones we might focus on more or less. And at the end of that list, I would also like to add something like assisting with community-led efforts or initiatives to enact positive change at the individual level.
I'm sorry, where are you?
So at the end of the list,
After emergency.
yes, exactly. Something that sort of gets at the interest of individual residents and the community in working on doing things like, we was just talking with a resident on Monday about developing a tree brigade and some of the efforts through Tacoma Mobilization and those sorts of things, just to be sure that there was some connection with those and that there might be opportunities to work together moving forward on those more individual focused activities.
Can I ask a question about one of your additions? So this section is more focused on adaptation and resiliency. And so I thought I heard you say you want to focus it on actions with the greatest greenhouse gas impacts, which applies to
mitigation.
the rest of it, but maybe not.
Yeah, we can have it as a separate, that could be a separate clause.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
we
right.
can.
So you didn't mean it
I
specifically
don't have a strong
to
feeling.
change this from resiliency. You meant it more about everything else.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, what's going to have the biggest
Although I think
impact?
that, yeah, and although I think that actually could apply as well. I mean, if we're sort of looking at things in a hierarchy of where we're going to prioritize funding, and there's an opportunity to provide funding to one place or another, there might be more or less, it might make more or less sense to focus on different things.
But I think the point is that resilience and adaptation and mitigating that isn't
Oh, I see what you're saying. So this is more focused on resilience.
Solving climate
Yeah.
change, it's supposed to be responding to
Responding
climate
to
change.
it.
No, I understand what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah, I guess I was looking at those things as sort of being, some of those being as additional climate change efforts.
Yeah.
No,
and
I
the
wouldn't
trees,
add that
that's true.
regarding resiliency, but maybe we can add that in somewhere
I
else.
had a similar thought though, although I recognize that I was drinking the same Kool-Aid. Because I mean, even though I recognize that the sections that you're bulleting out here, from lines, I guess 140 through the end of the document are, supposed to highlight the priority strategies to reduce greenhouse gases. These sections just stand out more in the document. And so if you're a resident and you're reading through this, it to me felt like there's a lot of things that we're talking about before we get there, but it's not as prevalent. So I don't know if it means calling out more specifically, instead of having a bulleted list that's kind of, you have the trees and then you have all of, you have stormwater management is kind of lumped together. If there's another way for us to really call out resilience in a way that's clean, like what it's in the latter part of the document, because I think, quite frankly, if we're being 100% honest, and this kind of goes back to the conversation that we just had, people will connect with, we're doing this work and we're going to make sure that your basements we can help to reduce your basement flooding. That's something that people will drink the Kool-Aid on, less so than we want everyone to have electric cars and be flying in the sky by 2025. Like, in their minds, that's not immediate, but my basement flooding is. So if we can try to make sure that resilience piece and that we're trying to work on that is really prominent and kind of cleaned up in a way that would make it easier for residents to kind of understand that that's an approach, then I think that will also help with some, selling some of the other aspects that are outlined. I think the approach here, and I'll send you some markup of just kind of cleaning things up and cutting some stuff out and really trying to get just to the meat of what we're trying to say. But I think where we're heading, quite frankly, is in a good place, because it really, from the read, we're moving towards that plan that we thought we were, kind of signing on to, because it's starting to hit all of those points that would be salient in a plan.
So at one point we had the resiliency piece, and a couple of the others were in the list of priority strategies. And then oddly enough, some people wanted to call them out by putting them in above it. So I don't have a strong feeling about it, but I think being more, I don't even know if it's a list or a bold, but calling out those specific aspects of the resiliency work that's already going on, and not just clumping them together makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think that would clean it up, and I don't know, Councilmember Costick, if that might kind of make it a little easier. I know when you said that, I had the same read, and it just seemed like there was a bunch of things kind of put together, but I think that there's more meat there, and if we were to call it out a little bit more, I think it would resonate with folks.
Okay. I agree with that, and I just want to say, and I wasn't sure I understood Councilmember Kovar's point before. I'd be cautious about adding mitigation to this piece as well for that reason, and keeping this, so just as you're looking at that, as we look at that moving forward. If we're on this piece, do you mind if I just ask one question on this one? On line 134, we say improve stormwater management for both the public space and stormwater flows on and between private properties. I don't know if we wanted to, I don't have an answer to this, but just when we were having our stormwater conversation, I was like, is improved the right word? I don't have an answer right now because it's late, but I just wanted to flag that for consideration.
I also noticed that wording seems a little bit strange to me, so I didn't know if there was a purpose exactly behind it, but happy to hear some refinement.
Yeah. Anyway, Councilwoman Costick, do you?
Yeah, just one more thing on that section, and then I had a few things in transportation. I guess now that, when I was first looking at this, I was tired when I got to this section. I wasn't so much thinking of it just as focused on resiliency, but also just in general, other climate-related actions. And so I guess the bullet point regarding efforts identified in the public space management plan process, that could be related to resilience, but it seems like that could also potentially relate to other actions that we want to take. So maybe we just want to kind of mess around with where that particular piece goes. So then looking into the transportation section, I appreciate the work that Councilmember DeBala did to take my money comments, which were potentially pretty random, and put them in here. And I still have a few additional things I'd like to consider.
Of course.
First of all, I think, and this is very minor, but I think it actually has a lot of importance, is I would take out in that very first under transportation the such as, because I think in most of these sections, and in some aspects here, I think we do want a such as, because we aren't necessarily sure which specific things we're looking at. But I think in that first section, we're pretty certain that those are things we really do want to look at more closely in the way that we're looking at the other priorities in this resolution. So I would take out the such as there. I have my other notes.
And then maybe do the how we did the buildings above. See how they.
Yeah, maybe a bulleted
make
list or something.
Yeah.
Something to call. They kind of got mushed up there, and it's hard to see them.
but like do it the same way we did.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to separate those out and make it a little clearer. And then in that same section, we have installing in all multifamily residential buildings with parking lots over a certain size, accessible outlets for vehicle charging by a certain date. I'd like to add something regarding new construction as well there, so that when new construction of particularly a multifamily building or a commercial building is approved, we look at requirements in those situations and sort of a policy of requiring EV chargers in those situations. Moving into B, I have a long list here, and we don't necessarily need to include everything on that list, but I think, again, sort of focusing on prioritizing actions to reduce the use of single occupancy vehicles and non-electric vehicles or non-emitting whatever our new
Zero
language will be,
emission.
vehicles, in particular through a variety of measures. Measures. I'd like to add some specific here. I would like to add a such as and add some things. Again, using that prioritized language, focusing on the things that have the biggest impact and co-impacts as well, or co-benefits. And I can send around a list. I don't necessarily need to go into it all here. Some of the things I've been thinking about. Pilot programs focused on electric transit and micromobility to reduce vehicle trips and emissions. Developing outreach and incentive programs such as community challenges and ride and drive events for EVs and transit. I think we talked a lot about with the buildings how we've done a lot of the voluntary stuff and we've sort of reached capacity on that. But I think with the transportation, we actually haven't done as much of the voluntary stuff, and that might be a good place to start and then get into more of the regulation side of things, especially since we have less jurisdiction to make regulations on some of the transit stuff. Incentivizing and supporting car share, and especially EV car share programs. Looking at the recommendations from the Parking Management Task Force and parking policies in general to discourage the use of personal vehicles and encourage EV use. And there are a number of great suggestions here submitted by a Ward 3 resident who I spoke with previously, and I haven't had a chance to look through all of his recommendations in the document he sent, but I think some of those could be incorporated as well. And one of his suggestions specifically was potentially looking at promoting EVs through reduced fee parking for EVs for an hour or something like that, which could be a good way to incentivize. And then possibly adding in here, adopting a complete or shared streets and or Vision Zero or similar policies to increase pedestrian and micromobility use in the city, which is something we've been talking about anyway as a concept. So I think it makes sense to incorporate that here. Moving into C, and again, I can send around these things, so I know I'm throwing a lot out here. In C, I'd like to move from just developing comprehensive approaches through a community conversation to looking a little more at developing a plan for a comprehensive approach, similar to how we've done with the building items. And I think, as has been mentioned today, there's a lot of great expertise in the community that we can draw on. It might also involve some level of working with a consultant or someone else who has some expertise in these areas, but really developing a specific plan for an approach to transportation. Because I think what we're struggling with here is we can toss out ideas, and I have some ideas I think are things we should pursue, but I also want to make sure that we do it in a prioritized way and we do it in a systematic way. And I feel like we've done that with a lot of the building things, and we haven't done that so much with transportation. And that would help move us forward on those things. And then two more quick things. Again, at this such as in C, I think we should look at. And then in D, I would like to add including improved, affordable, and accessible transit and the transition to electric transit and partnerships with Ride-On, WMATA, and other agencies to expand the effectiveness of transit routes and explore new reduced fee or free options. So kind of getting in there, the focus on transit and getting people out of their personal vehicles, as well as looking for opportunities to incentivize that and provide more equitable options through reduced fees, reduced fee or free options. Thank you.
I'm hoping you'll suggest some words.
I will, yeah, I'll send something around.
All right, so let's see, I think everyone had, trying to see, I did that one. Agree on moving away, as Councilmember Kovar said, electric vehicles or places where we say electric to changing it to renewable or zero emissions, whatever is appropriate in the context. I would entertain, as Councilwoman DeBala talked about, adding additional dates for things, if that would help us move things along.
Dates.
Is that what you?
By which we consider, not dates by
Yeah.
which people have to do stuff.
Right.
Okay, just
Yeah.
checking.
And that might be in clarifying the language in the resolve clause from 118 to 121. And then I think at this point, I know city staff has not provided much input, so I think I'd be curious once we get to a point to have staff provide input. And I think that's all I have. I think I share Councilmember Seaman's view on this, that I think we've done a great deal of work, but the real work is ahead of us and coming. So I would like to see us move forward with the resolution and provide the support to the city staff to move forward on these plans. So yeah, I guess that's where I am.
Are we ready to vote on the amendment to the matrix?
Oh, I don't think we have to vote on it. I think
Okay.
you're good, right? I think, yeah, you're good.
Hand vote?
Okay.
We do hand vote if you want, yeah. All right. I guess, I'm not sure we had to, we're not voting on the matrix as the city staff. Yeah.
It doesn't match what's in the document.
Yeah.
Right, we're not ready to deal with the matrix, I thought.
Yeah. I think,
I was
Talisha-
really excited about that, but I do think that, I instructed staff not to do anything because we wanted to hear from council about this before we start to respond and do the revisions.
So Talisha may be just about to say that the document, the matrix words that you used and the words that are in the resolution about coordinating and advocating are not the same, and you had some concepts that aren't in here. So I was gonna suggest, well, do you want to go ahead? That we do that we figure out how to put it in the resolution, not every single word you wrote, but put what's not in here already in the resolution, and then it can match in the matrix.
I feel much better, thank you.
okay, yeah. All right, Councilman, all right, then I'll see you guys. All right, so then the next steps, given where we're going and the progress we've made, I'd like to keep it on the agenda to vote on the resolution on March 4th. But we need to make, if for whatever reason over the next, we need to then post that by Tuesday, is that right? Did I get that right? Okay. If for some reason we can't get something posted by Tuesday for then the March 4th meeting, we'll consider postponing. Yes, Councilwoman Susan?
So, okay, now I'm confused.
Okay.
So, is the matrix something that is needed?
No.
Okay, so once we are kind of going back and forth on the language in the resolution, we're voting on the resolution, and then the idea is that staff would then need to come back with implement. Okay, so one of the things that I will make sure, Councilmember DeBala, that I give you is maybe another whereas clause where we can kind of clean up that list of things that folks need to bring, that we kind of need to follow up on, because I think one of the things that will be critically important is helping folks to understand that although the language now reads more like these are strategies, these are policies that we're considering, that it's really clear that we're actually going to take an approach that would include examining cost and approaches, which might not be what they saw initially, right? So I think we'll just need to clarify that a little bit. Right now, it's a huge laundry list of all of the things, like the co-benefits and the cost and who's impacted and whether or not it's great and whether or not it's not. And typically, you kind of want to do some of that when you're actually saying these are the policies. You're gonna, you kind of do that before you put it in the resolution. So if we can just kind of make sure that that point is clear in terms of the next step for staff, like as they're moving forward. I like Councilmember Kovar's point about making sure there's some reporting aspects there. And so it could be that the next, whereas staff will present to, the council a work plan that outlines strategies and timelines for addressing whatever we have listed here. I'm just making it up on the fly and it's late. But I do think that that's something that we need to make sure that we have, in addition to some reporting requirement and summarizing the
Right.
impacts of all of the work that is done.
Yeah, that's cleaning up line 118 to 121.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, so if everyone, Councilwoman DeBala, we can assist you with this, but if everyone could get their, send her stuff, comments, by tomorrow evening, would that be? Sounds like everyone has their stuff pretty much written up. I don't want to push us, but like if you get it tomorrow evening or by Friday morning, we can discuss the next revisions, and people can help you. Okay? All right, so then the goal is the posting of this on Tuesday, and if we need to, Tuesday, usually.
I thought it was a week ahead.
It's supposed
8
to be,
days.
it's supposed to be
8
8 days ahead. We're not always good at that.
Not always good at that.
Yeah, I can't guarantee that, but we'll give it a try.
Yeah. So, all right. And I know Councilmember Kovar has a meeting on Monday, so it would be great if we had something, or we're close to it. All right?
If it's this version, that's enough
That's
for
good.
people to discuss.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Great. All right, so we're done with this.
One more item.
One more item.
So we have a quarterly financial report. It is not exciting, but I'm trying to make sure that have a good routine about I'm trying to have a good routine about bringing this information to council on a regular basis. So this is for the first 6 months of the fiscal year. Many of the major items and revenue items, they come in on their schedules. So we are still expecting them. There's not any surprises, that are out there, but some of the items that we've not received or things that we have not yet spent on are still expected to either be received or be spent. We did receive, and Ms. Braithwaite just walked out, but today we did receive a $430,000 check from WSSC towards the Flower Avenue project, which made everybody very glad. Leslie, I'm happy to answer any questions, but there really wasn't anything noticeable that I think needs to call to your attention in this report.
I just had a question.
Yes.
Sorry, on the, and I know I sent you a note about this, on library fines and fees. I'm really confused. Do we have fines for the library? And if we need to double check this, we can, but we've budgeted for FY $20,000. I'm just like,
I think there still are some, but it's not for most people.
okay.
I mean, I think there's still some situations, but as we go forward in the next budget, if that needs to be adjusted, we will adjust
I'd like to
it.
just look at it. There's a lot of stuff that's been looked at and written out on equity issues regarding things like library fees.
So we
and
don't
things.
do library fines on most people checking out books.
Okay.
I mean, I think there's a couple things, and I'll probably misspeak, but I think there's some things, if it's a hot book and, people are trying to get it, there may be in one category. I think there's some things for something that's, there may be certain other categories, but for the vast majority of people, we're not charging fines.
Okay. I had a couple of other just questions. Where was it? Oh, the police rebate. Why is there such a difference from year-to-date in FY19 to year-to-date for FY20? Is that just like when checks got received, or?
It would be that, yeah.
Yeah. And probably the same for like the hotel motel tax. These are all like,
Yes.
Like weird things, like when checks come in?
These things are when the county or the state sends the stuff.
yeah. That was it. Those were all the.
There were a couple that concerned me, like the highway user revenue wasn't in yet, so
Yeah.
I double checked, but it just seems to be a timing thing, not that we're not getting the funds.
Cool.
So we do look at this because we don't want to be surprised.
Mhm. No, what I did was look at like where we were year-to-date FY
That's right.
'19, and then
That's-
compare it year-to-date FY '20, just to see like,
Yeah.
the things that like may make you nervous, making sure.
I
the
don't
check's in the
understand
mail.
why the county and the state don't have just standard dates that they send the stuff. It doesn't make sense to me, but for whatever reason, it's not. And I do think that there's been some changes in both the county and the state in recent years of being less predictable.
Okay. Those are all the questions I have. Councilwoman DeBala?
Yeah, my questions had to do with the sources of revenue that are way under, and are there any, maybe you just said this and I missed it, are there any that are expected to just not ever show up, or is it pretty much timing in
It's
all of these
timing.
cases?
It's timing.
So fines and forfeitures, there's no
The
reason
on-
to think we're gonna have less.
So the only thing, we have had less in terms of parking ticket fines and that kind of thing while we weren't fully staffed, and we're now fully staffed. So those numbers aren't changing, but they're not reflected here yet.
Right, okay. So that's on the revenue side. All of these that are off by a bit are timing of some sort, not changes in somebody's, as I said, money we're never gonna get. And then, can we go to expenditures, or are we still gonna stick with revenues for a minute?
You're it.
You're it.
You're
Go
wrapping us
ahead.
up here.
Oh, okay, I'll try to.
Unless somebody has a question.
Can you, explain the 57% on HCD administration, being, that's well over half of the budget is spent already. And there was one other where well over the half of the budget was spent already. Public Works Administration? Why does that not sound right? Oh, is that because of trees? Because of the tree consultant?
I'll have to double check, I'm sorry.
Okay, so
I
that's my
can't, I can't
question.
answer that question right off the bat. I will say that I am spending an enormous amount of time working with each of the departments, going through the budget. Part of that discussion includes estimated actuals for this fiscal year. And I've not found alarming increases on anything, so there wouldn't be something that should surprise us on those two categories. There have been a couple places where we're low.
Right, and I was gonna compliment you on the places
Those
where
are
you're low.
mostly vacancies, and I'd rather have the
Yeah.
people, I have to
Right.
say.
Right,
I don't want
so
them low.
there's-
I want them on target. I want.
so there's-
I'm not out to spend money, but I want some people. I cannot wait till March 2nd when we get 3 staff people on board on some professional positions, and we're moving on it.
So that's my question. There's 3 places in expenditures where the expenditure is well over half already, and what if, is there what's going on? That's what but you don't need to tell me that right now. I'm not
Okay.
sure I
I'll get
remember.
back to you.
Cool. All right, we are done for the evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.